Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to begin with nuclear reactors. But before we do that, please let me know if audio and video both are working fine. Wonderful, wonderful. So let's begin. So, yesterday we had started with the discussion on nuclear energy, where we understood some of the basics related to nuclear energy. What we understand is that there is a nucleus inside an atom, and in this nucleus, you have protons and neutrons. And this nucleus is able to bind all the neutrons and protons with a very strong force, and that's why it is called as the strong nuclear force. And the energy that corresponds to that very strong force is called as nuclear energy or nuclear binding energy. So that is the energy that we want. That's the energy that can be harnessed for electricity generation or for other purposes for that matter. So we see that this is basically how we are looking at this now. So that's the first part. Then we understand that all this energy that it is packing, whether uh, there are three different mechanisms through which we can harness that energy. Either it could be through radioactivity, or it could be through nuclear fission, or it could be through nuclear fusion. So these are the ways in which we can harness that energy. So radioactivity is when, in a natural manner, because of some reason, energy keeps coming out with the particles that keep coming out. So that is called as radioactivity. Then we have nuclear fission, where we see that there is a big nucleus that just breaks into two or three parts, and that is called as nuclear fission. And this is also something that releases a lot of energy. And then you have nuclear fusion. Fusion means to join together. So this is where we see that nuclei of hydrogen, they would join together, and while also releasing a lot of energy. So this is basically what we know until now about nuclear energy, and that is basically a summary of a 2-minute summary of the 2 hours that we had taken yesterday to understand. So coming to the second part of our discussion now, and this is about nuclear reactors. So until now, in a manner, you can say that whatever we have discussed is more of nuclear science, and what we are now about to discuss is more of nuclear technology. So what we are going to start with now is nuclear technology. So to understand nuclear technology, the very first thing that we need to know is that nuclear technology is coming from nuclear energy, the energy that we just spoke of. Now, out of radioactivity, nuclear fission, and nuclear fusion, the most important energy source for us is nuclear fission, because nuclear fusion, as we discussed yesterday as well, it's still into the future. We are still looking into these breakthroughs and small wins that we are getting every day, but it's still something which is in the future. Radioactivity, on the other hand, what we see with radioactivity is that it is something which is still, in a manner, uh, uh, a natural energy which is very less to comprehend. It's very less to even use for electricity generation. Yet, because of radioactivity, we do see that there are a lot of other activities where radioactivity becomes useful. And we'll discuss about that towards the later half of the chapter. Now, coming to nuclear reactor, when we are talking about nuclear reactors, we basically are talking about nuclear reactors that will use nuclear fission. All right, this is something that will use nuclear fission. All right, so this is what nuclear reactors are going to do, that we are going to harness the energy that we are getting through nuclear fission. Harness the energy, right? So to harness the energy that we are getting through nuclear fission, this is basically what we are doing with nuclear reactors. Now when it comes to a nuclear reactor, this is a you can say an oversimplified version of what happens in a nuclear reactor. So when we look at a nuclear reactor, there are two parts to it. This is, you can see in a manner, the primary side, and then there's the secondary side. Now, in the primary side, there are certain parts of the nuclear reactor that you should be aware of, that you should understand what exactly they do. So, first and foremost, we have here the core of the reactor. Now, core of the reactor is where all the nuclear reactions occur. All right. This is where all the nuclear reactions occur. So, the fission of uranium, the breaking of uranium 235, or first converting into 236 and then breaking into two parts, that's something that happens inside the core. So uranium rods will be present here inside the core, where all the nuclear reactions will be taking place. Then after that, if you see here, you have something called as the control rod. Now, when it comes to the control rods basically will control the number of neutrons in the nucleus. Now, why do we need to control this? See, what we understood is that if the number of neutrons is more than what is needed, right? If the number of neutrons is more than what's needed, then in that case, it's possible that the reaction might go uncontrolled. Correct? The reaction might go uncontrolled, and that's why we have that critical mass, so that you can manage the amount of nuclear material that you're using. So, if the number of neutrons available for you is more than what it should be, then in that case, the nuclear reaction perhaps cannot be controlled, and that is where we have control rods. Control rods will be made of metals like boron and cadmium. So these metals of the control rods, which are made of metals, they will be inserted inside the core whenever required. All right. So whenever it is required, whenever, let's say, if we see that the number of neutrons is rising, it's going above the number of neutron requirement that we have, then control rods will be inserted, and these control rods, they will absorb all the extra neutrons. So all the extra neutrons will be absorbed, and then they'll be taken out. Then they'll be taken out of the nuclear core. So that is the role of control rods, that any extra neutron that we have in the core, that will be taken away from the nuclear core. So that's the role of control rods. So they would absorb extra neutrons. All right, they would absorb extra neutrons. Then after that, this reflector, in a manner you can say, is like a wall. In a manner you can say that it is like a wall. It basically makes, you can say, a wall between the nuclear reactor and the outside world, so that all the gamma rays, all the neutrons, all the high energy particles that are being produced here at the core, they do not escape out of the reactor. So for that, you have this reflector which acts like a wall. All right, so that's basically what's happening here. Then after that, we have another part inside this core, and this is called as the moderator. There is another part inside the core called as the moderator. Now, this moderator basically is supposed to moderate what? It is basically supposed to control the speed of neutrons. All right, it will control the speed of neutrons. So on one hand, control rods will control the number of neutrons. So let me write it in this manner, it might become easier for you. This will basically control the number of neutrons. All right, it will control the number of neutrons, and moderator will control the speed of the neutrons. Control the speed of the neutrons, meaning that if, let's say, if the neutrons are at a higher speed than required, then we see that the efficiency of the reaction is not that great. Efficiency of the reaction comes down if the neutrons are traveling at a faster pace. So that's the role of a moderator, which will be mixed inside the core of the reactor. Then after that, there is something else which is called as the coolant. All right, coolant. The role of the coolant is to absorb all the heat that is being produced at the core. Because of the nuclear reactor, enormous amount of energy is being produced, and all this energy that we are producing here, this energy basically is coming out in terms of heat, in form of heat. So that's why we see that the coolant will be used, and the role of the coolant basically will be to transfer the heat. The role of the coolant will be to transfer the heat. To transfer the heat from whatever is being generated at the core towards the turbine. And then basically, ultimately, we'll see that you have the turbine, and ultimately this turbine will do the same job that happens in a thermal power plant, or a geothermal power plant, or a coal fired power plant. In all these power plants, whatever happens, wherever you have heat being converted into electricity, something similar takes place. And the same is the scenario here as well. We see that something similar will happen in this side. So that's how all the different reactor parts will be responsible for their individual roles. So just to uh, again revise everything, you have the reactor vessel, and reactor vessel basically will hold all the reactor parts, right? All the other reactor parts will be held by the reactor vessel, where you would also have steel walls at least 15 centimeter thick, steel walls, or sometimes also, as we had discussed, concrete walls. Steel walls or concrete walls will be there. And then after that you have the core, as we discussed, that this is something that contains the nuclear fuel, and this is where nuclear fission occurs, because you have uranium here and all the nuclear reactions are happening here, as we discussed. Then after that you have the control rods, and as we discussed, that they have elements or metals like boron or cadmium, and they will absorb the free neutrons, thus help in controlling the chain reaction. So they will be inserted whenever required, and whenever the number of neutrons are in check, they're not required inside the core. So they'll be inserted whenever the number of neutrons keep on rising, or they rise above the required level. Then after that, as we discussed, we have something called as moderators. Now in case of moderators, there could be something like water or carbon or something like graphite, etc., and they would just slow down the neutrons. All right, they'll just slow down the neutrons which are passing through this. So as I said, that controlling the speed will happen through moderators, controlling the number will happen through coolants. Then after this, we have the coolants. The role of a coolant again is to conduct the heat well. Basically, to transfer the heat from the core and take it to the turbine, to take it to the side of the turbine. So that's basically how coolant will be working. Now, while using a coolant, we also try to use a substance. We try to use a substance that should not or does not easily absorb free neutrons, because if it comes down to absorbing of free neutrons, if it does absorb free neutrons, what happens? Already you have the control rods which is meant to absorb extra neutrons. If coolant also does the same job, then in that case what may happen is that the number of neutrons that you have could go below the required number, of neutrons. So that is why we see that coolant, whatever is the coolant that we are using, whether it is water or carbon dioxide or sometimes even liquid sodium is also used in certain cases. In all these cases, we'll always ensure that we don't use something that easily might absorb the extra neutrons. So that's why these are all the reactor parts. So now when it comes to the reactors, we see that there are different types of designs based on these principles. All right, there are multiple different types of designs based on these principles, out of which there are few that India uses. So we are not really concerned about what other parts of the world or other nations are using. We'll focus on the ones that India uses, and the part or the types of reactors that have been a part of India's nuclear program. So the first one here is pressurized heavy water reactor. Now, pressurized heavy water reactor. So when we say pressurized heavy water reactor, just understand all these things, that what are these reactor parts that you have in them. So first, the fuel. The fuel that we use here is enriched uranium. So remember, we discussed yesterday that we enrich uranium so that you enhance the amount of uranium 235 in uranium mix that we have. So that enriched uranium will be used as a fuel here. The moderator and the coolant will be water, right? So water will be used as moderator and coolant. So now in this particular scenario, the name says pressurized heavy water reactor. Pressurized heavy water reactor. So let's try to understand why pressurized. I mean, if we are saying that it is pressurized heavy water reactor, it must mean that it is functioning at high pressure, correct? It should be functioning at high pressure. That's why the name pressurized heavy water reactor. So first question arises, why pressurized? Why pressurized? All right, this is the first question. Now, if you remember, we discussed something similar in geothermal energy as well, where we were discussing about flash tank. Do you remember what I told you? That why we maintain high pressure? in the below the flash tank, why do we maintain high pressure? What happens at high pressure? Is Vashna correct? Kamlesh correct? Femina correct? Abhijit correct? Garvit correct? Vivek correct? So many of you now have given the correct answer. So basically what we had discussed is that when you have high pressure, at high pressure, the boiling water of water might increase. So you'll be able to retain the liquid form of water even at high pressure, right? And in that way, it will be able to absorb more heat without converting into steam, correct? So something similar we try here as well, that why pressurize? So that so that water could absorb more heat without converting to steam, thus increasing the efficiency of the reactor. All right. So that is the reason why we are using pressurized heavy water reactor. That is where it is getting its name from. Now, overall, what we see is that that's one part of the question. Second part is about heavy water. That we are using something called as heavy water. First and foremost, what is heavy water? Can you tell me? And then I'll answer why heavy water. What is heavy water? D2O, as many of you have written D2O, right? So what is due to D2O? It is water that comprises of deuterium instead of normal hydrogen, right? Instead of normal hydrogen, we are using deuterium. So when we use deuterium, so heavy water, basically what is heavy? I'll just write it here so that you remember it later. When we say heavy water basically is where this is deuterium based water, D2O. If you remember, we discussed that hydrogen has three isotopes: normal hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium. So this is the deuterium that we are talking about. Now the question arises, why to use heavy water? Why not use normal water? Why are we using heavy water? Now the reason to why we are using heavy water is that heavy water, okay, so if I ask you, what's the difference between hydrogen and deuterium? What is the basic difference between hydrogen and deuterium? Mass number, that's correct. Number of neutrons, yes. So we know that hydrogen has one proton and zero neutrons, correct? Deuterium will have one proton and one neutron, right? Deuterium has one neutron. So because deuterium has one neutron, it means that if you are using, let's say if you are using heavy water as moderator, all right, if we are using heavy water as moderator, then in that case, uh, the chances that it will absorb extra neutrons is very limited, because it already has extra neutron. It already has one extra neutron. So the chances that it will be able to absorb neutrons is pretty limited. All right. So that's why it becomes a better moderator or a better coolant for us. It will be used as both coolant and moderator. So it becomes a better coolant and moderator as compared to normal hydrogen based water. Then the question arises that why not use tritium? Tritium has two neutrons. So the chances will be even lesser as compared to deuterium based water. Now the reason here that why we don't do that, all right, The reason why we don't do that is that tritium based water is very highly unstable. It's very difficult to control it. It's highly radioactive, so it's very difficult to control it, and hence deuterium based water is better suited to be used as moderator and coolant instead of tritium based water. So it is in a sweet spot, you can say that it's better than hydrogen based water, and it is better than tritium based water as well. So that's the reason. So why heavy water? Because deuterium has one extra neutron, so the chances of it absorbing neutrons during fission is very limited. That is one. And I'll also write here why not tritium based water, that why don't we use tritium based water. So we don't use tritium as it is highly radioactive and unstable. All right, so this is basically what's happening here. So we are talking about pressurized heavy water reactor. So why pressurized? Because at high pressure you'll be able to absorb more heat as compared to if it was normal pressure. And heavy water, because heavy water will not absorb extra neutrons as much as a normal hydrogen based water would have. So that is basically what's happening here. So that's why moderator and coolant, let me write heavy water. This is not just water, but it is heavy water. So now, pressurized heavy water reactor. When it comes to pressurized heavy water reactor, India, almost you can say almost 80% of the reactors that we have, it's heavy water reactors. Out of the 21 or so reactors that we have, 18 reactors are pressurized heavy water reactors in India. So that's why it basically becomes the most important, it becomes the most important reactor for us when it comes to our nuclear program. Now how exactly does it work? It's a very simple working. You don't need this diagram, I mean it's just for your reference. So if you see, what is happening is that you have all these fuel elements. This is nothing but, in a manner, you have uranium here, you have uranium. So these are uranium rods. All right, these are rods which are made of uranium. And these uranium rods, they, here you have pressure tubes because you are trying to maintain high pressure. All right, you are trying to maintain high pressure, and that's why these pressurized tubes are available here, which will maintain the high pressure. And you have the control rods whenever required. So that's the first side of the reaction. And then after that, as you can see, you have heavy water, which basically acts as a moderator and coolant, right? It acts as moderator and coolant. And because you are maintaining high pressure, we need steam generator, so that this water eventually will be converted into steam. And this steam will then go to the turbine. This steam will go to the turbine. The steam will go to the turbine, and from there on, because it is steam, it will again go to something called as a condenser. So you'll have a condenser, The condenser will basically help in the condensation of the steam. So steam will convert into water, and once it has converted back into water, it will come back. All right, and through this pump, it will be pumped back to the reactor. So in this manner, you have steam here, you have steam here as well. This is also basically steam, but then here again you are back to heavy water. So in this manner, we see that this cycle, the same cycle that we discussed in the basic line diagram that we have seen, the same cycle continues here as well. So that is the pressurized heavy water reactor. Now, after this, we have something called as the boiling water reactor. All right, boiling water reactor. Now, as the name suggests, that this is where water boils. Now, because water boils, we are not using any heavy water here, we are not using any pressurizer here. So this is a much more simplified design. This is much more simplified design. So overall, when it comes to boiling water reactors, India's first two reactors actually were boiling water reactors. All right, the first two reactors that India had, they were boiling water reactors. And then after that, we understood that efficiency-wise, we have a better design called as the pressurized heavy water reactors, and then we switched to uh, pressurized heavy water reactors. So these were India's first two nuclear reactors. India's first two nuclear reactors. So both of them were what? They both were boiling water reactors. We are still using two boiling water reactors, and rest 18 of them out of 20 such reactors are all pressurized heavy water reactors. So here also enriched uranium is being used. Water is being used as moderator and coolant. And if you look at the design is a simpler design, because you have all the fuel elements, you have all the control rods, and here steam directly comes in. So this steam again will go to the turbine, right? Steam will go to the turbine, and then from there on it goes to the condenser, and then through the pump, the water will be sent back to the reactor. So this is basically what's happening. So there is no need of any steam generator, there's no need of any pressurizer. So those kind of things are not required. All right, those kind of things are not required, and that's why it's a simpler design as compared to pressurized heavy water reactors. Now, efficiency of boiling water reactors is not that great. It's not as efficient as pressurized heavy water reactors, and hence, after the first two reactors, we never came back to boiling water reactors. Only the ones which were operational, they are still in operation. But all the new ones that we constructed, all the new ones were pressurized heavy water reactors. Then we have something called as the fast breeder reactor. Now, again, just try to break down the words and understand the meaning. We have a fast breeder reactor. Fast basically comes from the fact that we basically want fast neutrons to work. Fast reactors, because we want the speed of the neutron to be high. Now, how to get high speed neutrons? What is that part of a reactor that controls the speed of the neutrons? It is the moderator, correct? So because moderator does that, and that's why we see that this is basically where uh, they they don't use moderators. So they, because they don't use moderators, uh, the working of this reactor will happen at a high speed, right? It will happen at a higher speed. So that's why these are fast reactors. The second term that we are using here is breeder. So first term is fast, the second term is breeder. Now, why the term breeder is being used? Breeder is being used for a very unique reason, that the reactor produces more amount of fissile material than it consumes in operation. Fissile material meaning the material that can undergo fission. When we say fissile material means that this is the material that can undergo fission. For example, uranium 235. So that is called as a fissile material. So that's why now there is something very unique happening here, that we are saying that the amount of fissile material that we are getting in operation as a byproduct is actually more than the amount that we are actually consuming in operations. Meaning that if 100 grams of uranium 235 has been used, then we are getting 150 grams of hydrogen, 150 grams of uranium 235. So that's a very unique feature. It's not happening in any other reactor. It's not happening in pressurized heavy water reactors. It's not happening in boiling water reactors. It's not happening in other reactor designs. But in breeder reactors, this is something that happens, that they will be able to get more fuel than the fuel that they consume. So just imagine your vehicles running on petrol, that you are using 1 liter of petrol, and after traveling for 10 kilometers, you have 1.5 liters of petrol in your vehicle. That's what's happening here, and that's what's unique when it comes to the breeder reactors. And that's why breeder reactors are said to be the future of nuclear fission. India is working on fast breeder reactors. There are other countries which are working on breeder reactors. So overall, we see that because we understand that breeder reactors are the future, because they'll be able to give us more fuel than the fuel consumption that is happening in operation. And that is the reason we see that why breeder reactors become so popular. So so that's why breeder reactors. So that's why the name fast breeder reactor. Now, what's happening in India with regards to breeder reactors? So first, we had developed something called as fast breeder test reactor. Fast breeder test reactor. Now, this fast breeder test reactor basically has been in operation for more than 20 years now. It has been giving us energy, it has been giving us good output, and electricity generation has been happening through them. Then after that, there is something else which is under construction, and this is prototype fast breeder reactor. Prototype fast breeder reactor. So prototype fast breeder reactor, basically these are the two types of reactors in India. All right, these are the two types of fast breeder reactors in India. So I'm just writing it here. These are India's fast breeder reactors. All right, these are India's fast breeder reactors. So in this manner, we see that this is now, when it comes to the fast breeder test reactor, it has been in use for now almost more than 25 years now. At the same time, when it comes to the prototype fast breeder reactor, now the prototype fast breeder reactor, uh, it has been under construction for quite a while. 2012, I mean, in 2012, when the previous government, the UPA government, was at the center, they were asked the question that what's the status of the prototype fast breeder reactor, and they had said that the construction has almost completed and very soon it will be in operation. So this was 2012. 10 years later, last year, again, the same question was put forward to the NDA government, that what is the status of the prototype fast breeder reactor. The government exactly said the same thing, that the construction is almost completed. It will take another 1 year or so for us to make it live. So 10 years later, the government's changed, but the answer did not. So what happened? Why this prototype fast breeder reactor is taking so much time? Some of the scientists and some of the interviews that have happened here and there, and there is no official comment on it yet, but some have indicated that the government has been worried about the safety factor of this reactor. That the reactor design is complete. The reactor design has been complete for a while, but they are not very convinced about the safety of the reactor, and there are various measures that are being added to make this reactor completely safe. And that's the reason why it is believed that why prototype fast breeder reactor yet is not in operation, but very soon it is expected that it will also go in operation. So that is, you can see in a manner, this is the status that we have right now with the prototype fast breeder reactor. Now, after knowing about all these reactors, so this is how the fast breeder reactors look like. You don't have to be worried. You don't have to be afraid of the diagram. If you see, essentially, it's the same. You have the same control rods. You have the same core. And then this time, you have liquid sodium. All right. Here, just remember that the coolant that we are using here, is liquid sodium. In the others that we discussed, it was water, heavy water, etc. This time the coolant is liquid sodium. So liquid sodium will be used, and again, because this is also a reactor that maintains high pressure, so you need steam generator. You have the same turbine, same condenser, sorry. You have the same pump and the same operation, basically. All right. So ultimately we see that this is basically what we do in this particular scenario. So that's why don't go and think of the complexity of the picture that you see on your screen. Just remember that simple line diagram that we had seen. It's more or less a version of the same. There's not much difference in that. Now, coming to India's nuclear program, because all these reactors that we have discussed, all these reactors become the center or the focal point of India's nuclear program. Now, first and foremost, what is India's nuclear program? What is the program? And why did we need this program? What is this program and why did we need this program? Now, first and foremost, when it comes to, let me start from the why question, that why did India need this program? Now, when it comes to India's nuclear program, the main reason why we devised this program was so that we can start using thorium. The main motive, the main motive to why we devised this program was so that we can use thorium. Now, why thorium? First and foremost. All right. So, until now, what we know is that uranium is the primary fuel. In all the other reactors that we are discussing, pressurized heavy water reactors, boiling water reactors, etc., we are using uranium as the primary fuel. But in case of India's nuclear program, the entire program was devised so that we can start using thorium. Now, why thorium? All right. Why did we want thorium? Why did we want to use thorium? The reason is that India has abundance of thorium. All right, India is one of the leading nations with regards to the thorium reserves in the world. If you look at the numbers and the data, you'll see that India is among the top 5 countries. Some of the data says India is among the top 5. There are certain data also available which say India is the second largest country with the deposits after Australia. So I would want to believe the second highest number. But India, whether second highest or top 5, whatever be the case, we know that India has abundance of thorium in the monazite sand, especially in the monazite sand that is found in coastal Kerala, largely in coastal Kerala, but also in other parts, right? So also in other areas, other coastal areas of the country also, but largely in the monazite sand that we have in the coastal Kerala, that is where we have a lot of thorium. So we know that India is one of the countries with the largest deposits of thorium in the world, and we know that although thorium cannot be directly used as a fuel like uranium 235, because in case of uranium 235, we discussed that uranium 235 is the only naturally fissile material, only material which is naturally capable of nuclear fission. So that's only uranium 235. But thorium can be made fissile, that you can convert thorium into something that will be useful as a fuel. And that is precisely what we want. Because once we are able to move to thorium, it's very simple that once you move to thorium, you don't have to import uranium. Because right now, when it comes to uranium, although we do have certain mines in India, do have certain areas in India where uranium deposits are also available, like in Jharkhand or Andhra Pradesh, etc. But still, that is not enough. We don't have enough of uranium, and that's why we import a lot of uranium. from Central Asian countries, from other from even Ukraine or Russia and all these countries. We get uranium. We basically import uranium. So again, the same logic that we discussed about coal and petroleum, that we cannot be dependent on somebody else for our energy requirements. So that is why we don't want to be dependent on other countries for getting uranium, and that's the reason why we want to shift to thorium. That is why we want to shift to thorium, because once we are able to shift to thorium, we'll be able to uh, easily be dependent on our sources, and then not develop on countries like Australia or Ukraine or Central Asian countries, etc. So that is the reason why thorium, and that is the reason why this India's nuclear program was even devised. All right. So the question to, why this program? Why this program? Because we wanted to start using thorium as our nuclear fuel instead of uranium, as India has one of the largest deposits of thorium in the world. All right. So India has one of the largest deposits of thorium in the world. That's the reason why we wanted to shift to thorium instead of using uranium, where largely we are dependent on just the imports. All right. So that's why this program. Now coming to, what is this program? So there are three stages to this program. The first stage is where we want to use pressurized heavy water reactors. We want to use pressurized heavy water reactors. Then in the second stage, we move to the fast breeder reactors. And in the third stage, thorium uranium 233 base cycle in the reactors will be used, where there are two types of reactors that India is working on. One is called as advanced heavy water reactor. Advanced heavy water reactors. And the second one is called as Indian molten salt. Indian molten salt breeder reactor. So these are the two reactors that we are using, and both of these are supposed to be used in the third stage. So that's why right now they're under construction, because we haven't still reached the third stage. So let me discuss this with this particular diagram, that what exactly is happening here. So in the first stage, we want to use the conventional nuclear reactors, which are basically the pressurized heavy water reactors. All right, pressurized heavy water reactors, also the boiling water reactors. Pressurized heavy water reactors and the boiling water reactors. Now, these have to be operational for a long time, at least for up to 30 years. They will have to be operational for up to 30 years, and they would be able to generate a lot of energy. But while they generate a lot of energy, they also produce plutonium. This is plutonium. They also produce plutonium as byproduct. All right, plutonium is something that they produce as byproduct. Now this plutonium will be used in the second stage, where you have the fast breeder reactors. Plutonium basically is used here. Plutonium is used in the fast breeder reactors, And what we discussed about fast breeder reactors is that the fast breeder reactors will be able to produce more fuel than the fuel that they consume. So that's why they'll be able to produce even more amount of plutonium, right? They'll be able to produce even more amount of plutonium than they are consuming in this operation. So that is why plutonium, to get this plutonium, we are using stage 1. Now, let me ask you one question here again. So my question is that why are we dependent on pressurized heavy water reactors to get plutonium? Can we not just get uranium from somewhere, just like how we are importing uranium or mining uranium? Can we not do something similar for plutonium? Can you think of reasons why we can't do that? Why are we waiting for 30 years to get all this plutonium so that our second stage could run? I'm getting a lot of answers, but not the correct answer. I'm still waiting for the correct answer. Yes, Kamlesh, you have given the correct answer. So the basic reason why something like this, plutonium is not natural. Plutonium is a man-made or an artificial element. So you only get plutonium out of these kind of reactors or these kind of nuclear reactions. So just like, for example, let's say when it comes to uranium, we can mine uranium, correct? We can mine uranium and use uranium. But in case of plutonium, that cannot be done. Plutonium will only be produced through nuclear reactions. So unless there is a nuclear fission happening somewhere, you can't get plutonium. Unless there is some kind of radioactivity happening somewhere, you can't get plutonium. So plutonium is not naturally available, as is the case with uranium. So that's why we have to depend on this process so that we can get enough of plutonium so that we can run our second stage. This is the reason, because plutonium is something that is only produced only produced through nuclear reactions. So that's why we have to wait. All right, that was, we have to wait. And then once we have enough of plutonium available, we move on to our second stage. Now in the second stage, what you see is that there is this thorium here. Now what we are basically doing here is something called as irradiation of thorium. All right, irradiation of thorium. So irradiation of thorium, what do we mean by it? Irradiation of thorium is that we are passing radiations through thorium. All right, we are passing radiations through thorium. We'll just mention it. Passing radiations through thorium to convert it to uranium 233 isotope. All right, so we basically are getting uranium 233 out of this operation. Now uranium 233 has a similar problem with plutonium, that it is also something that we can only produce via these kind of methods. It is again not something which is natural. Natural uranium, if you remember, we have two: uranium 235 and uranium 238. That's it. Others are not natural. All right, others are not natural. So we have to produce uranium 233 via this process, and that is where thorium becomes usable, because we'll be repeating the same thing, and this also has to be operational for like 30 years. This will also have to be operational for like 30 years, and then only we can get enough of the fuel available for the third stage. Now the third stage, you have the thorium based reactors, where, as we discussed, that either advanced heavy water reactors will be used, or Indian molten salt breeder reactors will be used. Either of the two reactors will be utilized in the third stage, and we'll repeat the same process here, that thorium will be used here. Irradiation of thorium will happen and it will keep on converting into uranium 233. It is a breeder reactor, so it keeps on giving us even more amount of uranium 233, and we can run the operations. Now, why we are even thinking of the third stage, this is where things become interesting. That with the 30 years of operation in stage 1 and 30 years of operations in the stage or in the second stage, we can run the third stage for at least 500 years. We can run the third stage for at least 500 years. So that's why we are investing this time. That's why, although this is something, when it comes to India's nuclear program, India's nuclear program was devised in the 1960s. This program took its shape in 1960s, and it was the effort of Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha and others who basically led to something like this, that they have been pioneers, and especially special mention to Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha. He was, you can say, he was the mastermind behind India's nuclear program, and he was the one who took all the effort to even convince the government of India to even think of this master plan. That it took a lot of convincing, because you have to understand that even since the time of the independence, Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha was always behind the government of India, and especially Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, to adopt a nuclear plan. But you have to understand that we got our independence in 1947. 1945, we saw what nuclear weapons can do. Nobody wanted to even use the term nuclear. Everyone was afraid. No government would ever want to get into that kind of a controversy. Just 2 years later, and he was somebody who was just proposing it, that we need to go there, we need to go there, we can't solve our energy needs just with coal, and all kind of efforts he was making. And ultimately, he was given a go ahead, thanks to uh, the kind of support that he also got from the government at that point of time. And although even forget about the opposition that was sitting in the parliament, even the government and many of the ministers in the government, even they did not want to go forward with the plan, only for the fact that you can see in a manner that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was convinced and he was on board. And that could take a shape later, because then parliament also essentially gave a go ahead that these kind of plans could start taking shape. Otherwise it would have been very difficult, and yes, we would have adopted a plan maybe in 1970s, 80s, or 90s somewhere. Just the fact that in 1960s itself we started working on this plan was a big effort. And and Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha has been one of the most important scientists when it comes to the early advancements of science in India after independence. Not only in nuclear program but also in space program, along with other scientists, other very very important scientists like Vikram Sarabhai being one of them, Satish Dhawan being one of them, Dr. Bhaskar being one of them, and all the other scientists who were also a part of the program back then. And then later on, the younger scientists like Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam also coming later. And so we see that, or Dr. Nambi Narayanan also coming later. So all these names were very, very important in shaping up of India's energy plan, India's space plan, and every other thing that India needed to work upon in 1950s and 60s after the independence. And that's why Homi Jahangir Bhabha becomes a very, very crucial name when it comes to India's nuclear program. He, uh, unfortunate for India that he lost his life also very early. I think it was 1967 when he lost his life to a plane crash. And very unfortunate, but this sudden demise for India was a big setback, because he was moving very fast, he was moving very quick, and he could have done a lot more for India, have if he had been a part, let's say, for the next 10, 15 years as well. And that's why it is also said, and there are stories behind it, there are books that have been written, there are even TV shows that have been made on it, that probably it was not a natural accident, and it was even, they say that probably US intelligence agency, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of the US, they might have been behind this accident, because uh, US did not like the way India was moving fast, and also because how close India was to USSR back then. And USSR really helped India, whether it is the nuclear power plant designs or the weapons or anything that India needed help with. USSR was there, and because of that being the Cold War era, anyone getting close to USSR, US would not like, and anyone getting close to USSR would not like. So all these things were panning out in the world, including India. And this is where it is also said, it is also believed that it might be a possibility. But unfortunately, whatever be the reason, we lost him early, and but at least he had given a shape to India's nuclear program by then. Or it was 1966, as Garvit you have mentioned. So yes, maybe. So I was confused with 1966 and 67. Yeah. So this basically is what India's nuclear program has been, and there are three stages to India's nuclear program. Now, when it comes to nuclear waste disposal, now we know that, okay, fine, this is the India's nuclear program, and we are able to generate electricity from nuclear energy with the help of this program. Now coming to the next thing, and this is a problem that we facing, and this is India's nuclear waste. Now when it comes to nuclear waste, we first and foremost categorize nuclear waste into two parts, one called as low level radioactive waste, and the second one called as the high level radioactive waste. So low level and high level, so this is how we classify the waste. Now when it comes to the low level waste basically are the ones which are not very harmful. That's why low level, because they are not very harmful for us, they are not very highly radioactive, and that's why it's easier for us to dispose them. It's easier for us to dispose them. But at the on the other hand, when we talk about high level waste, high level waste is where it can be dangerous, because this can be highly radioactive. It can be highly radioactive, and that's why it can be very dangerous for us, it can be very dangerous for the human health. And that's why we try to dispose them with utmost responsibility. There are special units, we have special arrangements where all the high level nuclear waste would be disposed. So that's why there are nuclear facilities, basically there are nuclear waste facilities where all these wastes would be taken, and this is where ultimately we'll try to dispose them. And for that we also use something called as borosilicate glass. Now borosilicate glass is a glass that does not decompose very easily. It takes thousands of years for borosilicate glass to start decomposing, and that's why there is a process called as vitrification. There's a process called as vitrification. Now vitrification as a process is where we are trying to capture the nuclear waste in a borosilicate glass, which is a kind of a, you can say, a leach resistant form, ultimately solidified form of borosilicate glass where we are using it. So that's why this process will be used for disposing uh, any high level waste, anything that can be radioactive, anything that can be extremely dangerous. Now, coming to the last part of our discussion, and this is about the applications of nuclear technology. We see that there are applications in various different fields, whether it is agriculture, whether it is medicine, whether it is industries. In all these cases, we see that nuclear technology, in one way or the other, will be very, very useful. Most importantly, obviously, it is electricity generation. So, I would say that there is no other application that is more important than electricity generation, whether it is through nuclear fission in the present, or whether it is through nuclear fusion in the future, right? Whether through fission at present or with fusion in the future, this is what we want. We want to generate electricity with the help of nuclear fission and fusion. So that's the most important, I would say, that's the most important use of nuclear technology right now. And all these reactors, etc., that we are discussing for that reason, because we want to generate electricity out of it. Now, coming to other applications are largely based on radioactivity, some form of radioactivity. For example, agricultural application. uh, it can be used in water and soil management, for pest control, for animal productivity, for food safety. In all these cases, we can make the use of radiations. We can make the use of various radiations and controlled amount of radiation. Let me write this: controlled radiations. All these things can be used, all these things can be achieved through controlled radiations. So for example, when it comes to pest control, so for pest control, we will use controlled amount of radiations so that we can kill the pests in our food articles, in our crops, everywhere. So that is basically how it can be done. At the same time, in agricultural applications, we also have nuclear fertilizers. We are even using nuclear fertilizers. So for example, we use nitrogen 15. We use nitrogen 15. Now nitrogen 15 becomes very, very crucial in giving us an idea about the absorption rate of fertilizers. So so what happens then is that we'll be able to use the fertilizers better. We'll be able to optimize the use of fertilizers, because nitrogen 15 gives us an idea about how much fertilizer should be used. So once we know that amount, we'll be able to optimize it. Neither will you overuse it, because overuse of fertilizers also means that you will be degrading the soil. You'll be degrading the soil if you are overusing it. On the other hand, if you are not using enough, obviously the growth of the crops will not be good enough. So that's why we need to find that optimum amount of fertilizers to be used, and that is where we see that these nuclear fertilizers are useful. Then after that, it can be used for carbon dating. Now, in case of carbon dating, we use carbon 14, another radioactive form of uh, carbon. Now, in this manner, in this scenario, what we basically see is that even if you have something which is 10,000 years old, 20,000, up to 50 to 60,000 years old, we'll be able to find the age of them. And why we are able to do that is that in the living organisms, the ratio of carbon 14 to carbon 12 is fixed. All right. In living organisms, we see that the ratio of carbon 14 to carbon 12 is fixed. Now, when they die, after this, what happens is that this carbon 12 amount, this remains fixed, but carbon 14 will keep on decreasing. Why? It's radioactive. It's radioactive, it will keep on decreasing in its amount. So ultimately what happens is that carbon 12 remains intact, the quantity of carbon 12 remains intact, quantity of carbon 14 will keep on decreasing, and that will give us a calculation about how old something is, how old any fossil, etc., that we have discovered, how old is it. To find that, we'll just try to see what is the difference between carbon 14 to carbon 12 ratio. So because, and here there is a concept that we use sometimes called as half life, a concept which is called as half life. So half life basically is the time in which a radioactive element decreases to half its initial quantity. All right. So this is something which we call as uh, half-life. Now, in case of half-life of carbon 14's half-life is of 5700 years. All right, it is of 5700 years. So it takes 5700 years for carbon 14 basically to reduce to half of its size. So what happens is that if you have 100 grams of carbon 14, it will reduce to 50 grams in 5700 years. Similarly, it will reduce to 25 grams in another 5700 years. So in this manner, every 5700 years, almost 5700 years, it will keep on decreasing to half of its original mass. So that basically will give us a back calculation to what should be the age of any material that we have. Similarly, in improving public safety, we see that it is used in various ways. For example, in smoke detectors, in even making runway lights, or in heart pacemakers, etc. In all these different cases, we see that we can make the use of nuclear technology. Similarly, in industrial applications also, we see that there are number of different ways in which the quality testing or the strength testing of any material can be done with the help of radioactive elements. So that is also where we see that there are applications of nuclear technology. Then after that, there are medical applications where we see that radiations or radiology will be used to treat or prevent diseases. So for example, even in the chemotherapy that happens or radiotherapy that happens for cancer treatment, there also controlled amount of radiations are used so that we could kill the cancer cells, we could kill the cells in the body that have started becoming cancerous. So all these kind of things are possible. All these kind of things can be done with the help of nuclear technology and various different radio isotopes. And then lastly, even in space technology, right now ISRO is working on something called as radioisotope thermoelectric generators. ISRO is developing, or ISRO is working on radioisotopes thermoelectric generators. Now, in this particular scenario, when it comes to this, what we see is that this will help in providing the required power, especially when we take deep space missions, when we are going away from the sun. Whenever we are near the sun, in case of let's say Aditya L1, Chandrayaan 3, and Mangalyaan, and all these, then in that case, solar energy is extensively used. But let's say if we are going towards Neptune, we are going towards Pluto, etc., then the solar energy will not be enough that will be able to run our space vehicles on solar energy. So that's why we need fuel there. And one of the best fuels, one of the most efficient fuels is radioisotope thermoelectric generator, where we use radioactive isotope, that is plutonium 238. So that's something that also is being developed by ISRO, which is an indication that maybe in the future we are also going to look towards a deep space mission. Now, one thing that I've done, and I'll ask the subject matter experts to share this with you, is a list of radioactive elements. List of radioactive elements with their uses. This could be important from maybe prelims point of view, that what radioisotope is being used for what purpose, how in medicine, what is being used in agriculture, what is used for public safety. So that list is there. It's a very factual list, so just go through that list. I've just taken the list of all the important ones and I've given the use of that radioisotope. So from prelims perspective, perhaps it can be important because sometimes these radioisotopes are in the news. So I've already asked them to share it. I hope they have this. Have you got it? Can you tell me if you have? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. Anyway, I'll ask them again. I mean, after the class, whenever I get to talk to them, I'll tell them. So this is just a list that will be important, if at all, from your prelims perspective. So that's why I've made this list and I've asked them to share it with you. All right. So this is about this chapter. Look at this question. This was asked in your prelims 2023 paper. This question was asked. Just read the question and then I'll launch the poll for you. All right, so I'm starting the poll. Please mark your answers. Yes, many of you have given the correct answer, and some of you have also given the correct explanation. That's great. So, for those of you who do not have the list of radioactive elements, I see that in the chat, the subject matter experts have pasted it for you. So, please go through it. Please download it. All right. So, 53% of you have given the correct answer. It was an easy question. So, let me just explain this question for you. Consider the following statements. First statement is India, despite having uranium deposits, depends on coal for most of its electricity production. This is correct. What did we discuss? That right now, approximately 55 to 60% of our electricity comes from coal, right? And we want to decrease it further. I also told you that 5 years back we were at almost 75% and 75%, and now we have decreased it to almost 55 to 60%, but we are still pretty much dependent on coal. Statement 2 says uranium enriched to the extent of at least 60% is required for production of electricity. Is 60% required? No. What did we discuss? Just 3 to 5%. What did I tell you? I told you that if we go beyond 5%, then we are basically weaponizing it. We are not going to use it for electricity anymore. How much enrichment happens? 3 to 5% only. So that's why this is wrong. 60% is way too much. So look at the options. First option says both statement 1 and statement 2 are correct, and statement 2 is the correct explanation for statement 1. No, both are not correct anyway. Statement number 2 is wrong. Both statement 1 and 2 are correct, and statement 2 is not the correct statement. Again, statement 2 is not correct. So that's why this is also wrong. Statement 1 is correct, but statement 2 is incorrect. This seems fine. Statement 1 is incorrect. That's not the case. So the correct answer will be C. So it's an easy question. Right, this kind of a question is also called as assertion and reasoning question. It used to come a lot in the past, and for the last 10-15 years they did not ask these kind of questions, but again we have seen a pattern change in the kind of questions that they are asking, and this time there were a lot of these assertion and reason questions. So assertion and reason question is a kind of question where two statements will be given to you. Both of them either could be independent statements, or maybe the second statement actually correctly explains the first statement. So for example, here the first statement is that India, despite having uranium deposits, depends on coal for most of its electricity production. Let's say the second statement was that getting energy from coal is much cheaper as compared to getting it from uranium. Or another way to write it could have been the technology behind getting energy from coal is easier compared to getting it from uranium. Both these statements are correct. So then you could have marked A, that both statement 1 and 2 are correct, but statement number 2 is a correct explanation for statement number 1. Another case, let's say statement 1 was what it is right now. Statement 2 could have been something else, like let's say uranium enriched to the extent of 3 to 5% is required for production of electricity. Now, in this case, statement 1 and 2 both are correct, but statement 2 is not the correct explanation for statement number 1. Right? Both of these individually are correct, but statement 2 does not explain statement number 1. So this kind of question, now we see that they have come back to. They used to ask it almost 15 years back, but now we see that they have revisited this kind of a question. All right. Next chapter is biotechnology, but before that, if you have any confusion, any question that you want to ask, please ask your questions now, and then we shall move forward. I could not understand how application of nuclear technology use in agriculture in various field. How will it work? So basically, we use radiations in some way or the other, or a radioactive element in some way. So, for example, pest control is the example that I've taken. Pest control means what? We know that a lot of fruits, vegetables, etc., they will be damaged because of the action of decomposers or bacteria, microorganisms, etc. With the help of radiations, we kill those microorganisms, we kill those pests or even smaller pests, etc. Even in the crops, we can do that. So with that, you increase the longevity. We'll be able to store these fruits and vegetables better. Even in the seeds, we can store the seeds in a better manner. So there are all these things that can be done. Similarly, there are some radioactive elements like nitrogen 15, which is used as a fertilizer. So that's why we say that all this is nuclear technology. Can we enrich 90% and the consequences? Yes, we can increase 90%, and if we reach 90%, the consequences are for the world basically, rather than us, that we basically are creating atom bomb. So if so much of enrichment is done. Thorium is only available in the coastal region of Kerala or elsewhere also. We do have it in coastal Karnataka as well, other parts of the southern coast also, even in Tamil Nadu and Andhra coasts also we have found it. But Kerala coast has the most of it. Why snake-like shaped pipe from previous slide? Which pipe are you talking about? If you are talking about this basically increases the total area that you have so that you can store more, nothing else. Nuclear, can you explain the nuclear reactor again? Nuclear reactor, basically there are basic parts of nuclear reactor that we discussed. So if you see this, you have the core. Inside the core, nuclear reaction happens. You have the moderator in the core, which will try to control the speed of the neutrons. Then you have the control rods that will try to control the number of the neutrons. So all this will make the ideal case scenario inside the core so that nuclear reaction could take place and you generate electricity or generate energy or heat energy out of it. Then you have the coolant that will take this energy out of the nuclear core and take it to the turbine where electricity generation would happen. What is the government concern regarding implementation of fast breeder reactor? It basically is the fact that they are still not convinced about the safety of the reactor, and they want to be 100% sure about the safety before the operations could begin, and that is why there is a significant delay that has happened. Fast breeder reactor again. Fast breeder reactor, you have neutrons which work fast. That's why the name fast. Neutrons being fast also means that there is no moderator being used. And then breeder because it produces more fuel than the consumed fuel. And that is why fast breeder. Didn't understand vitrification. In case of vitrification, what we are doing is that in vitrification, we basically take small glasses, all right, and the nuclear waste will be put in the glass and you will cover it with the glass. You will basically encase it inside this glass. And this is borosilicate glass, which does not decompose easily. takes tens of thousands of years to decompose. And that is basically what we are doing in the process of vitrification. What's the use of uranium 233? We are simply using uranium 233 as a fuel in our second and the third stages, rather in the third stage, not the second. Don't understand the three-stage nuclear program of India. It's simple. We have three stages where the first stage is pressurized heavy water reactor. Second stage is fast breeder reactor. Third stage is advanced heavy water reactor, where in the first stage uranium is being used as a fuel, and we are getting a lot of plutonium from the first stage while also generating a lot of electricity. All this plutonium will be used in the second stage where fast breeder reactors are working, and here also we produce a lot of electricity while also producing a lot of uranium 233 with the irradiation of thorium. And then all this uranium 233 will be usable in the third stage where more of thorium based reactors will be used. In fusion, can we use the energy generated in the initial fusion process for further fusion process? It's very difficult to do that. The manner in which the fusion plants work is pretty complicated, and that's why reusing that energy is not that easy. And it's, I mean, an easier way is to use electricity from outside, from any other source that we are generating. I think radioactive elements is harmful to us. How will they become? See, radioactive elements can be harmful if you have an exposure in high quantity. But if let's say the quantity is very, very limited, and that is the case in most of the cases, then in that case they are not. And in many of the cases, especially for the ones that are not very bulky, which are not having very high atomic number, in them, even if they are radioactive, they are not harmful. For example, carbon 14 is not that harmful for us. Nitrogen 15 is not harmful for us unless you are exposed to a lot of it. But the heavier ones like uranium, plutonium, etc., they can be harmful even in the smaller quantities. A basic thumb rule is that if the half life of any radioactive element is less, then it is less harmful. If the half life is more, then it is more harmful. For example, plutonium has a half life of 20,000 years. 20,000 years. So that is why it is much more harmful as compared to many of the others. Why are we so much law abiding country? None of the other developed countries play geopolitics. They see their interest. Why we are not promoting our security interests like Vietnam, Taiwan, Iran, Russia, etc.? We do. I mean, we are not being aggressive about it, but it's not that we don't promote our security, we don't promote our requirements. We do that. That's the reason why we are silently developing all these things. We are right now among the best of the powers in defense. We are right now one of the best powers in space technology. We are slowly and steadily getting to a point where we will also develop a very good energy resource pool. But at the same time, you also have to understand that India got its independence in 1947, and we then started working on the very poor form in which the British had left us. So for European countries, it has been easy because they haven't been marred by a colonial power. So that's why they have earned their resources, they generated their resources, they colonized us because so that they could get those resources. Same goes for US. Russia also has been largely uh, because like Russia also has had a large resource pool. Same goes for, if you, for example, you've mentioned Iran. So there are other geographical reasons also for that. So all that also has led to us not being in the same position, but we are growing. We are growing, and you look at the data since 1947, how slowly, gradually, every decade we have done better than the previous decade. So it's not that we are not doing good, it's not that we are not looking after our interests. We are, in any way possible that we can do, we are. But we also have to maintain relations because we are right now we are not completely independent. We are dependent on a lot of countries, and that's why there are a lot of decision making where we cannot be independent enough. So that's why many a times we see that we might take a step back, but it does not mean by any way that we are not growing. I said, don't keep that many PPTs. I don't keep extra PPTs. I mean, I think today I have how many? I have 75 slides here. I know that generally it takes me almost 50-55 slides. But if you don't ask questions, if I am not taking your questions, I'll have that time to take those 10 extra. So that depends on the class and how much you are also engaged in the classroom. So it's not that anything extra is kept. Is borosilicate glass used in fast breeder reactor? Everywhere. I mean, wherever you have nuclear waste to dispose the nuclear waste, we use the glass. Won't nuclear fission energy generation technology become outdated by the time national nuclear program reaches the final stages? I don't think so, because if, let's say, if you're thinking in the context of nuclear fusion or maybe other alternatives like hydrogen or solar energy, etc., we need a lot of energy. There are a lot of things that we can't do. There are a lot of things where we compromise because our energy generation is not that great. The per capita consumption of energy, if you look at India as compared to many of the other countries, you'll find that we are not in the top 5. It's not that we consume as much energy as a country like US does, or the European countries, or China does. So that's why we have a lot of scope, and that's why every bit of energy that we can get will always be useful. So if we get to a stage where thorium becomes useful, why not? Because we'll be able to get cheap energy from there, and hence we want to use it. What is the issue relating to Japan releasing nuclear water? So basically, they decided that some of the nuclear waste water that is being generated in their nuclear fission plants, they said that we have treated it well, and now we are just releasing it into the oceans, which was obviously protested by many countries also, and in general by people as well, that it might pollute the marine life, it might pollute the water. So that is why this happened. Can uranium be enriched to beyond 100%? How can happen it beyond 100% is nothing, no? Use of thorium in third stage. Basically, thorium in the third stage will keep on generating more of uranium 233, and uranium 233 will be used for um, used as the fuel in the third stage. Right. So I've taken, I think, most of the questions. Hmm. So let's move on, and we are moving on to our next chapter, which is biotechnology. Now, in case of biotechnology, first to give you the context with regards to your prelims and the mains examination, what we basically see is that consistently questions have been coming from here. Whether in prelims or in your mains examinations, the questions have been coming. In prelims, obviously, every year, at least one question, if not two or three, comes from biotechnology. In the mains examination, not every year, but maybe every second year, one question does come. In the mains examination, the questions that have been asked from here have been fairly simple. In the prelims examination, although I cannot claim so, I can't say that the questions that have come in the prelims examination have been easy. In prelims, the biotechnology questions largely we see that have been moderate to difficult level questions. We'll discuss a lot of these questions that have been asked in the past papers. But overall, as a chapter, first and foremost, it's not as big a chapter as the first two have been. So now onwards, the chapters that we have, these are pretty small chapters as compared to our first two giant chapters. But biotechnology, from the perspective of the examination, is very, very important. Prelims and mains, every year, you should expect that a question will come from here. Now, first and foremost, what do we mean by biotechnology? What is biotechnology? So, again, there are two words from here that we are discussing. So, when it comes to this word, you have two terms, bio and technology. Now, this term bio, this comes from a word that is bios. As you can see there, that it comes from two words. One is bios, it is a Latin word for life in a manner. So that's why biology also derives from here. So bios, basically, you can say in a manner, it is something which is related to life. And then the second term is technology. Okay, what is technology? We are discussing the subject of science and technology. What do you mean by technology? Okay, something that makes human efforts easy, new creation, application of science to live to make life easier, the process that makes an action efficient and effective, the thing that makes work easy, science which makes life easier. Okay, so you are basically thinking about around correct lines. So all of these answers are more or less correct. In very simple words, technology is nothing but application of science. Application of science. So we know the theory of science, we understand the core concepts of science, but when you start utilizing it in your life to make your life easy for coming out with new solutions, anything, so then in that case it is called as technology. So this is basically how we come to this term. So when we say this is biotechnology, means that we are talking about uh, application of science in living organisms. In case of living organisms, so when it comes to biotechnology, we can say in a manner that biotechnology is nothing but the application of science or application of living organisms for some kind of application. When we are using the living organisms or any process in the living organisms for some kind of application, then in that case we say that it is biotechnology. All right, so that is how we basically uh, define it. So you have bios and bio coming from bios, which is basically about living organisms, and then you have technology, that is the application of science. So that's why what we can say is that it is the application of living organisms and their biological processes in order to make the best use of, sorry, not microorganisms, of the organisms for the benefit of mankind. All right, so in this manner we are basically talking about biotechnology, where we are using any organism or any life process or any sub process of any organism so that it can help us in one way or the other. How is the question? Now there are certain simple things where we see that biotechnology has been in the use. uh, a very straightforward example is making of curd from milk. Now when it comes to making curd from milk, what's the simple process? That you might have a bowl of milk, you just add 1 teaspoon of curd in it, just leave it overnight, and you'll see that next morning milk would have converted into curd. Why exactly does that happen? It happens because of action of a certain bacteria, that is lactobacillus, and that bacteria will just convert milk into curd. It gets the medium, that is milk, where it can multiply, and it does multiply, it does reproduce, and it basically can convert milk into curd. So that's why we see that in this manner, the making of curd is a simple process where we see that uh, it is an application of biotechnology, right? So now it's an application of biotechnology that we have been using for maybe thousands of years, that we have known about this for a very long time without realizing that what we were doing was an application of biotechnology. So making curd is one such example. Similarly, there are other such examples also that have been here. For example, making preservatives. Making preservatives. So making of preservatives also is something that has existed for a very long time. Similarly, making of bread with the help of yeast has been another process which has been in the use for a very long time. Similarly, the process of fermentation. Again, fermentation as a process is used in various industries. Even in biofuel making, we use the process of fermentation. In making of or manufacturing of alcohols, fermentation is used. And all these are processes that have been in the use for a very long time, for more than 1,000 years, a couple of them. So for example, the process of fermentation, meaning making alcohol. So making of alcohol goes back in history before curd. So in a manner, you can say that the humankind knew its priorities, that before understanding how to make curd, we first understood how to make alcohol. So so all these processes, these are some of the processes which are natural processes which we have been using. And in a manner, it's all biotechnology, because in all these cases we are using some kind of organism, some microorganism, and because of action of all these basic organisms, we see that we have been using them for all these purposes. So that's all biotechnology, right? This is all biotechnology. But when we are talking about biotechnology today, we are talking about modern biotechnology. Now this modern biotechnology is different. Modern biotechnology is different, or in a manner you can say a branch which is also sometimes called as applied biotechnology. So this modern biotechnology or applied biotechnology is different as compared to these methods, because many of these methods, for example, making of curd, for example, uh, all these you can see in a manner are hit and trial methods. That these are not scientific methods that somebody came across or somebody came up with. They stumbled upon it, they saw these kind of things happen and they used it later. They could use it later and that became a process in the way. But when it comes to modern biotechnology or applied biotechnology, there are a lot of things in the medical field, a lot of things in the agricultural field, a lot of things in the industries. In all these things, we are doing something because of a reason. We are doing something because we know how to do that, and we know that we will get a positive outcome out of it. But in case of all the ones that have been practical methods that have evolved over years, all those have not been modern biotechnology but just certain processes that we stumbled upon. That somebody saw that curd could be made out of milk, and they started using it. So it was not that they came out with a scientific solution because of some kind of reason, or they saw it under a microscope. No, it's all something that kept on developing as the humankind developed. So but when it comes to modern biotechnology, it's pretty different. And this is where we see that the use of the genetic material comes into the picture. Our understanding of what DNA is, or our understanding of what genes are, this is something that has helped us in understanding these methods of modern biotechnology. So that's why this modern biotechnology or applied biotechnology is pretty different as compared to every other example that we have taken until now. And in this particular uh, chapter, this is what we are going to study. This is going to be the subject matter for our study in this particular chapter, where we'll look at the various aspects of modern biotechnology. We'll first start with our basic understanding of what is the meaning of DNA, what are genes, what are chromosomes, etc. And then from there on, we'll go and build upon understanding of the different branches of biotechnology. That how do we use biotechnology in agriculture? How do we use biotechnology in medicine? How do we use it in industries. So all these things plus some of the specific methods that are very often in the news. For example, what is stem cell, what is cloning, what is DNA fingerprint, what is the issue with GM crops. So there are all these kind of things that we are going to discuss in this particular chapter. So we'll start with DNA, genes and chromosomes, understanding of it, and then we'll move on to all the other chapter or all the other topics here. So, but before doing that, before moving on to it, let's take a break here, and then we'll start with the continuation of this particular chapter. Right now the time is 6:40, so let's be back by 6:55. Let's be back by 6:55 p.m. And this is where we'll start with first the basics here, and then after that we'll move on to all the different branches. Welcome back, everyone. So, to start with our basic understanding of biotechnology, we first need to try and understand these basic terms about what is DNA, what is genes, what do we mean by chromosomes. So, this is where we start from, and then we'll start to go towards all the different branches of biotechnology. So, first and foremost, to understand DNA, genes, and chromosomes, just try to understand the living world. I mean, when we talk about any organism, what do we know about an organism? That any organism would be made of organ systems, right? Any organism will be made of organ systems, and these organ systems are obviously made of organs. These organs are basically set of tissues. These are set of tissues which are arranged in a certain manner that they make an organ, and these tissues are made of cells. All right, these tissues are made of cells. And cell, what do we say about the cell is that cell is the smallest structural and functional unit of life. Smallest structural and functional unit of life. Why? Because the cell in itself is a living being in a manner, because it has all the ingredients that you know or that you need for anything to be alive. And that's why you have so many unicellular organisms which are made of only one cell. So that's why we say that cell is the smallest structural and functional unit of life, right? Now, inside the cell inside the cell we have a completely different world, and inside the cell we have something called as the nucleus. We have the nucleus. Now, do you know what is the role of the nucleus? What does nucleus do? So cell, we say that this is the smallest structural and functional unit of life. So smallest structural and functional unit of life. Yeah, so we say that it's a brain of the computer, sorry, brain of the cell, uh, governs the things. You can say that it has the DNA material, yes. So most importantly, it controls and coordinates all the activities that are happening in the cell. All the activities happening in the cell, they are controlled by the nucleus, and that's why nucleus is said to be the brain of the cell. Why the brain? What's the role of the brain? That brain will collect all the information from all across the body, process that information, and give an output, give an instruction, pass on an instruction to all the organs of the body about what to do. So similarly, we see that nucleus will also try to control and coordinate all the activities happening inside the cell. And apart from that, it also has the genetic material. It has the material that basically has all the information, all the specific information about any individual. So inside the nucleus we have chromosomes. All right, we have chromosomes, which you can say are bundles of genes, and these genes are made of DNA. All right, these genes are made of DNA. So inside the cell we have the nucleus. Nucleus basically has a pair of some pairs of chromosomes. So for example, in humans we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. All right, 23 pairs meaning a total of 46 chromosomes. All these chromosomes are made of different segments of genes. Certain segments of genes together, they'll come and they'll make the chromosomes, and all these genes are in turn made of DNA. All right, so this is basically how we see the organization within the cell. So now, to understand what is DNA, gene, and chromosome, if you look at this figure that we have right here, so we have the cell. Inside the cell we have the nucleus, and inside the nucleus we have the chromosomes. And as you can see that genes will be made of smaller DNA segments. They'll come together, they'll make the gene, and this gene together makes up this entire chromosome set that we have. Now, in humans, as I just told you, that we have a total of 23 pairs of chromosomes. So chromosomes basically, as you can see here, these are long coiled up thread like structures which are made of DNA and protein. All right, they are made of DNA and protein, and in humans we see that there are a total of 23 pairs of chromosomes, out of which 22 pairs are common across males and females. 22 pairs are common across males and females. The 23rd pair is different in males with respect to females. And that's why the 23rd pair is what determines the sex of any human. Whether it's a male or a female will be determined by the 23rd pair of chromosome. So in this manner, we see that there are 23 pairs, 22 are common, and the last pair is different in males versus females. So all these chromosomes, they basically are long thread-like structures inside the nucleus, and they have all the genes which are coiled up together to make that chromosome. Then we have genes. So genes are segments of DNA. All right, they are segments of DNA, and they contain the instructions for development and functions of living organisms. So, and that's why they also become the basic units of heredity and are passed down from the parents to the offsprings from one generation to another. Now, when it comes to these genes, for each and every specific property that anyone shows, you have certain gene that is leading to something like that. For example, the color of the eye. So color of the eyes, you'll see that some have black eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, etc. Correct. So all these eyes, the color of the eyes uh, are specific because of certain genes. So whatever be the gene, that will decide the color of the eye. Then apart from that, even the type of skin, the even skin color or the height that of an individual, all these things can be genetic. The amount of hair that is left on the scalp can also be genetic. So all these things are genes which are being passed from one generation to another. All right, so all these specific properties, every specific property in an individual is because of certain gene or the other. All right, so that's why they are also called as basic units of heredity, because they'll be passed on from generation to generation, and they are all made of segments of DNA. They are all made of segments of DNA. So DNA, what is DNA? DNA basically is the molecule that carries the genetic instructions used in the growth, development, functioning, and reproduction of all living organisms. And in a manner, that's why we are saying that it is the blueprint of our cells. It's like the blueprint of our cells, because each and every smallest of the things, whether these are specific properties of me or whether these are general things that it will that would happen in any individual. For example, for even how the heart beats. So beating of the heart will be common across the human species, similar common across the species, but yet there will be a DNA that has the instruction so that something similar could happen in the body. So everything that is, whether it is common across the species or whether it is an very individual in nature to that particular person, or not only person, any animal or plant, all these things are there inside the DNA. And all these DNA, this DNA basically are made of four chemical bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thiamine. So that these are four chemical bases. Base meaning anything that is basic in nature, that has a pH value of above 7 is called as a base. So these are four chemical bases. So DNA is made of these four chemical bases, and they are arranged in a certain manner. So as you can see that you have adenine, thiamine, they always are together, and you have guanine and cytosine, which are always together. So AT and GC are always together, and they will make different combinations, and these combinations will come up with a certain property. For example, this can be ATGC, or it can become TAGC, or it might become TACG, or maybe ATCG. Correct. Now, all these combinations are possible, and they will arrange in a specific manner. They'll all be made in a specific, they'll all arrange themselves in a specific manner to make this twisted ladder kind of structure, which is the structure of DNA. This is what DNA basically looks like. So basically, if you, let's say you take a ladder and you twist it, so the kind of shape that you get, that's the shape of DNA. Now, in this manner, so always remember that these two will always come together and these two will always come together. That's why it's not that a CATG is possible. That cannot happen, because cytosine will never come with adenine. It will always come with guanine only. So this kind of a structure is what we get, and this is called as a double helical or double helix structure. So that's the structure of DNA. Now, apart from DNA, so all these DNA, basically all these chemical bases will come together, they'll arrange together in a manner that they have some kind of specific property in the body. Now, apart from DNA, there is another similar molecule that we have in the body, and this is called as the RNA, or ribonucleic acid. Now, in one case, when you have DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, and on the other hand, you have RNA, which is ribonucleic acid. Now, the basic difference between DNA and RNA is that in case of DNA, you have a double helical structure, whereas in case of RNA, you do not have the double helical structure, but rather you have a single helical structure. So that's why you can see that this is the structure of RNA and this is the structure of DNA. All right. I hope that makes it clear, the basic difference in the structure of DNA and RNA. But there are, functionality wise also, there are differences. The function of DNA, what we know is that it will have all the genetic information that is being passed on from one generation to another. And in case of RNA basically is something that is required for protein production inside the nucleus. So the protein, to take care of the protein production that is required for any kind of function in the body, we see that we do need the services of RNA. So function wise, we know that function wise they are going to be very, very important. And then in that case, functions wise they are different, structure wise they are different. That this is double stranded, and in case of RNA it is single stranded, and that's why it is deoxyribonucleic acid, and this is just ribonucleic acid. The location, we know that location when it comes to the DNA, it is found in the cell's nucleus as well as the mitochondria. Now, in the animal cells, in nucleus and mitochondria, it is found. And at the same time, if it is plant, in case of a plant, even in plastids, it is found. We have plastids which are found inside only the plant cell. In animal cells, plastids are not found. Plastids basically uh, help in the food production. I mean, that is where chlorophyll comes from. So so plastids will have chloroplast, and chloroplast will produce chlorophyll. So DNA is not only present inside the nucleus, but it is also present in another cell organelle which is called as mitochondria. What does mitochondria do? What is the role of mitochondria? What do we call mitochondria as? I'm very sure that you have the answer. Yes, everybody is jumping to the answer. Powerhouse of the cell, right? So it is called as the powerhouse of the cell. And why do we call it as powerhouse of the cell? Mainly because of the fact that it basically uh, uh, provides energy to the cell for different types of things that the body has to do. For that, the energy that is required, or the cellular energy that is required, it comes from mitochondria. So that's why it is called as the powerhouse of the cell. And in, so that's why DNA, just remember that DNA is found in nucleus, in mitochondria, also in plastids. And interestingly, this is also a question that was asked in your 2004 prelims, long time back, 2 decades back. This is a question that was asked in 2004 prelims. They had given nucleus, mitochondria, plastids, and the question was, which of the above parts of the cell contains DNA? One only, one, two, and three, two and three only, and so on. So it was a difficult question because everybody knows that In nucleus, we have DNA, but not a lot of people know that even mitochondria, even plastids also have DNA in them. So that was the question that was asked in your 2004 prelims paper. So, so that is where DNA is found, and RNA will be found everywhere. Wherever protein synthesis has to happen, RNA will be present here. So all these are differences. Apart from that, there is one more difference, that you have adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine in case of DNA, whereas in case of RNA, you have guanine, adenine, and cytosine, but instead of thymine, you have uracil. So that's another difference that we have between DNA and RNA. So that's why these differences perhaps could be important for your prelims examination, if at all they have to ask these questions. So these are, you can say, some of the basics. So that's why just understand the basic differences between the all of these, that what is DNA, what is genes, and what are chromosomes, and how are they different. So that's why understanding that DNA is the basic building block, genes are segments of these DNA together, and chromosomes basically house the genes, correct? So that is basically how we understand the basic differences between all of these. Now coming to the use of all these things. So I just told you about what is DNA, genes, etc., because these are the terms that will constantly keep coming back again and again in this chapter. We'll keep talking about genes, DNA, etc., and I'll keep using all these terms very casually. So that's why you should know the meaning of all these terms, so that you'll understand every time we are mentioning these terms. Now, when it comes to the branches of biotechnology, we see that biotechnology can be used in various different ways. It will be useful in agriculture, in medicine, in environmental applications, industrial applications. There are multiple ways in which we can make the use of biotechnology. So each and every branch, each and every segment where biotechnology is being used, there's a color that has been given to it based on its use. So when we say green biotechnology, we are talking about agriculture. Every agricultural use of biotechnology, we say that it is green biotechnology. Then we have red biotechnology, which is largely concerned with the medical use of biotechnology. Then we have blue biotechnology. Blue biotechnology is with regards to water. With regards to water, any water related use of biotechnology, we say that it is blue biotechnology. Then after that, we have white biotechnology when it comes to any industrial use of biotechnology. We have gray biotechnology when it comes to environmental applications of biotechnology. We have brown biotechnology. Brown, basically it is the color of the soil, so that's why in the arid areas, the water scarce areas, in the deserts, etc., when we use biotechnology for something, then we say it is brown biotechnology. Then we have violet biotechnology. Now, violet biotechnology is used whenever anything which is not directly an application of biotechnology, but something related to it. For example, the intellectual property rights related to biotechnology, the laws, the acts related to biotechnology. When we are talking about all these kind of things, then in that case, we say that it is violet biotechnology. All right. So that's why related to law, ethical, philosophical issues, intellectual property rights, as I told you, acts, etc., all these things will be counted as violet biotechnology. And then after that, finally, there's dark biotechnology. So dark biotechnology is more about the misuse of biotechnology. Misuse of biotechnology is called as dark biotechnology. So for example, somebody making bioweapons, somebody using it for warfare, somebody using it for creating a pathogen. So all these will be counted as dark biotechnology. So we'll go into the details of these things. What we are seeing as branches of biotechnology, that is basically what we are going to discuss in this particular chapter. So first, to start with, all the medical applications of biotechnology. Now, when it comes to the medical applications of biotechnology, there are multiple ways in which biotechnology today is being used. and especially when it comes to medical biotechnology, you'll see that this is the area, this is the sector where the most amount of money is being invested. Most amount of money is being invested in medical applications of biotechnology, or what we call as red biotechnology. Now, if you see this, even if you look at the data for India, you'll find that 70% of all biotech investments in India is on medical applications. More than, actually, let me write this, more than 70% of all the money that we are spending on biotechnology, we are spending it on medical applications. So that, with that, you can imagine the kind of money that is being invested here, the amount of money that we are investing here. It's huge, and there are obvious reasons for it, because for all the unsolvable diseases, all the diseases for which we don't have an answer today, let's say something like a cancer, something like AIDS, and all these unsolvable problems, that is where we are trying to use biotechnology in one way or the other. Whether it is through gene therapy, whether it is through stem cell therapy, whether it is through the process of cloning or DNA fingerprinting. So there are multiple different ways in which we are trying to solve the unsolvable problems of the medical science today. So that is why medical applications become crucially important. So when it comes to gene therapy, for example, gene therapy is nothing but the therapeutic delivery of nucleic acid into a patient's cell as a drug to treat the disease. Now, what do I mean? Gene therapy. Why are we using gene therapy? What do we know about gene? We know that gene is responsible for specific features, correct? It is responsible for specific features. So even in keeping the body well, keeping the body intact, genes are responsible. And that's why sometimes what may happen is, due to, let's say, malfunctioning of a gene, or because of maybe absence of a gene, we might see certain diseases developing in somebody. So a disease might occur because of presence of a gene which is unwanted, absence of a gene which was required, or maybe some transformation, some changes in the gene which is unwanted. Because of all these reasons, there are chances that a disease might occur in a body or in an individual. So that is where gene therapy becomes crucially important. That is where gene therapy becomes crucially important, because with gene therapy we'll be able to solve these problems, either by introduction of a new gene, or it could be about introduction of new gene, or it could be about removal of an unwanted gene, or it could be about modification in a gene. All right. So it could either be about introduction of a new gene, a gene that was not present, which was absent, or it could be about removal of an unwanted gene, or it could be about modification in a gene so that it starts to function normally again. So all these things can be done. All these things can be done in a gene, and this precisely will be called as gene therapy. So that's why when we are using the properties of gene to cure or prevent a disease, in that case we'll say that it is gene therapy. Now, apart from that, there is something called as genetic testing. Now, when it comes to genetic testing, this is a kind of a test that will identify the changes in chromosomes, genes, or proteins. So how exactly do we do that? Now, when it comes to gene testing, genetic testing, many a times when we test for certain genes, it might give us an idea about some kind of pre-existing condition, or maybe a kind of condition that is now developing in the body. So either, let's say, if it is a genetic disease that somebody has uh, uh, inherited from their parents, then it will detect that disease. Even if sometimes if there is certain changes happening in the genes, then also it will detect those changes, so that you can, with that early detection, you can at least start taking preventive steps against that disease. So that's why we'll see that all these things are possible, and genetic testing will reveal all these things. For example, today what we see is that you might have seen that there are so many lab tests that can happen very easily today, that even they will come to your home and they'll collect your blood samples and they'll do your full body checkup, etc. Have become pretty common today, right? And very easy also. Now in all these cases, there are, for example, you'll see that they'll also say that they can do test for uh, possibility of a cancer, or possibility of diabetes, and all these things. So all these things that they do, they basically look for certain markers. They look for certain genetic markers. They look for certain genetic markers, and these genetic markers, they will give them an idea about whether or not this disease is present or absent, or if there is a chance of this disease developing, even if not today, maybe in 10 years, maybe if not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe 5 years from now. But there will be an indication in certain gene, and that's why they will indicate it, and they'll say that, okay, fine, these are the precautions that you should take, so that you can prevent even the future occurrence of such a disease. So that's basically that is something that can be confirmed with the help of a genetic test. Then in drug administration, now even in the money that we were talking about, the money that is being spent on medical applications of biotechnology, most of the money is being spent on something called as biopharmaceutics. Biopharmaceutics. Now, biopharmaceutics basically is about the interrelationships of the physical or chemical properties of the drug, the dosage form, and the manner of drug administration on the rate and extent of drug absorption. What do we mean? Biopharmaceutics, right? Just break the word down. Biopharmaceutics. Bio, we know where it comes from, living organisms. What is pharmaceutics? Where does pharma come from? What is pharmaceutics related to? Can you tell me first? Medicine, correct, right? It is related to medicine. So when we are looking at the physical and chemical properties of medicine and its dosage form, and how it would have an effect on an individual or a living organism, whether positive or negative, whether a positive impact by curing that disease, or whether a negative impact in terms of, let's say, a side effect. So all these things are determined as a part of biopharmaceutics, and that's why biopharmaceutics becomes a very, very important branch of medical biotechnology, because this is where we are trying to create all those medicines, produce all those medicines that will have a very good positive impact on somebody. That even if the disease is being cured, can we cure the disease faster? Can we cure the disease faster? Can we make the medicines cheaper? There are all these different things that we are trying to examine as a part of biopharmaceutics, and hence there are multiple different branches of biopharmaceutics. For example, we have something called as pharmacokinetics. Pharmacokinetics, again, try to break down this word. You have the word pharma, you have the word kinetics. So pharma, obviously, again, related to medicines. Kinetics, where do we use the word kinetic? What is the word kinetic related to? Okay, moving, movement, energy, motion. Yes. So that's why when we say kinetic energy, we mean that is energy due to motion. Correct? Due to motion. So kinetic is the word that is related to motion, and pharma related to medicine. So pharmacokinetics is related to the motion of medicines inside our body. How fast does the body react to these medicines? What is the absorption rate of the medicines? How fast are the excretion of medicines happening? So when we try to examine all these things, this is something that we call as pharmacokinetics. And this pharmacokinetics becomes a very, very crucial part of biopharmaceutics. How? Is it only about the improvements? Is it only about how can we improve the rate of absorption, or how can we improve the rate of this medicine acting in the body? No. Every disease has its own pace. Every disease has its own pace, right? There are certain diseases that develop in us very quickly. Diarrhea, for example, cholera, for example. These are diseases that occur very quickly, that develop very quickly, might take just a couple of hours to develop. On the other hand, some viral diseases that they take time. Let's say COVID-19. So COVID-19 from just a few hours could take up to 2 weeks of time to develop in a certain individual. So that's why we have to design medicines, if at all we can. Right now, I know that we are using medicines as of sorry, vaccines as of now. But if let's say we have to develop a medicine against it, we'll have to ensure that this medicine acts faster than the rate of development of that disease. Then only it can cure it. So the diseases that occur faster, will have to make medicines also that respond faster. And for the diseases that occur slower, we can make medicines that can even act slower. So that speed of the disease development also matters, and that is where pharmacokinetics becomes very, very crucial, right? So that's why it is described as what the body does to the drug refers to the movement of the drug into, through, and out of the body. Correct? So that's why the absorption rate, the assimilation rate, the response rate, all these kind of things are discussed as a part of pharmacokinetics. So that's why this becomes very, very crucial. Then we have something called as pharmacogenomics. So again, you have pharmagenomics. So genomics basically is nothing but the study of genes. So when we say pharmacogenomics, we are trying to combine genetics and pharmaceutical, right? Genetics and pharmaceuticals, meaning that how exactly is a medicine related to the gene of a person or the genetic makeup of a person. How does the genes of a certain kind, or let's say a certain arrangement of genes, how does it respond to the medicine? Fast, slow, whatever is the response. So all these kind of things, and depending on the genetic makeup, can we make medicines that will work faster, that will be more effective? So that is basically what we are trying to make here. So basically it will help us in making effective medicines. Effective medicines based on an individual's genetic makeup or genetic structure. So that basically is the role of pharmacogenomics. Then after this, we have something called as virotherapy. Now, in case of virotherapy, viro comes from virus, right? Viro comes from virus. So that's why when we are making any antiviral drug, there many times virus is used. In making vaccines, even in making vaccines, we see that we make the use of virus in many cases. For example, even in COVID-19 vaccines, we have made the use of virus, and that's why it is called as virotherapy. Then after that, even in making insulin. Now about insulin, you might know that insulin is required by our body to remove excess sugar from the body, right? To remove excess sugar from the body, we need insulin. Now in diabetic patients, in patients who are suffering from diabetes, they do not have enough of insulin. their body is not producing enough of insulin, and that's why they have to take insulin externally through insulin injections or these kind of methods. So that is why we see that this insulin will be made artificially, and then it will be injected inside the body of a person. So that is how we see that this kind of a disease, against this disease, insulin works. And that's why insulin will also be a medical application, a biotechnology medical application, with regards to this. So that's why just understand that there are various different things. Apart from that, we are also, at a later stage, we are also going to study about stem cells. We are also going to study about cloning. We'll also study about DNA fingerprint. And all these are also going to be helpful for us when it comes to medical applications. So that's why in case of medical applications, we see that there are many ways in which biotechnology can be made use of in the medical science. Now, overall, what happens is, let's say if they have to ask a question in your mains examination, right? If a question has to come in the mains examination, then this kind of a question can come. What do you mean by red biotechnology? What are the health related benefits of biotechnology? What are the medical applications of biotechnology? So there are many ways in which the same question can be asked, and the answer to it will be all these things that we have discussed, that depending on the word limit, you'll have to pick and choose what you're writing. So this is about the medical applications of biotechnology. Any question until now? Anything? If you have any question in mind. Difference between nucleus and nuclear energy and biotechnology. How do I even answer that? They are completely different, no? This nucleus is a biological part inside your cell which has the function to do everything in the cell, to control and coordinate all the activities inside the cell, to have the genetic material inside the cell. Nucleus of atom is completely different. It has protons and neutrons inside it. What is the relation between DNA and chromosomes? So, chromosome basically you can say is the structure that has all the DNA in it. All the DNA arranged as different genes which have been arranged in this chromosome. So that's why you have only 23 pairs of chromosomes, and in all these chromosomes you have millions of these DNA that are present inside it. So these DNA will arrange themselves as segments. These segments become the genes, and there are almost 20,000 genes that a human body has, and all these genes basically are arranged as 23 pairs of chromosomes. Can't get mitochondria. Mitochondria, just know this, that mitochondria is a part inside the cell called as a cell organelle. It's a part inside the cell that provides energy to the entire cell, provides energy for each and every function inside the cell. Please show the slide of branches of biotechnology. You can mention, you can see that in your PDF also. This was the slide. In virotherapy, we make the use of virus. Yes, precisely, we do that. Gene therapy basically is nothing but the use of genes. So either adding a new gene which was absent, that some disease is happening in your body because there was a gene that should have been present is not, so we add that gene externally, we get that gene, we add that gene in your genetic makeup. Or maybe there is a notorious gene in your body which is causing some problems, so we just remove that gene. Or maybe there are some changes happening in the gene, we prevent those changes from happening because they are causing some trouble. So that is what gene therapy does. From which part of body we can get the genes? Every part of the body, because cell is present in every part of your body, so that's why you can get genes from any part of your body that you want. Please show the see, this is what I don't know why, but every day I'm saying the same thing, but you don't have to say the same thing multiple times. So Sachin, you said please show the slide of branches of biotechnology. One, two, three, four, five, at least five that I can count on just the chat. Why do you have to do that? Bone marrow transplant is gene therapy, not related to gene therapy, but rather related to stem cell therapy. We'll discuss that. Is mitochondria there in human body? Yes, of course it is. As I told you that every cell has mitochondria, because if there is no mitochondria, it will not be able to get the energy that it needs to function. So every cell, whether in a human, whether in an animal, whether in a plant, everywhere you'll have mitochondria. How does genes are extracted by the lab experts to find out the victim of fire accident or any guilty person in case of field of forensic science? We'll discuss this. We'll go to the topic of DNA fingerprinting, and that is where we'll discuss this. How mitochondria provides energy to each cell? Basically, you need the carbohydrates for providing that energy in form of ATP, and that is being provided by mitochondria. That is synthesized by mitochondria, and it provides it. Pharmacogenomics, again, pharma genomics, meaning that depending on the genetic makeup of an individual, when we are designing medicines accordingly so that it can be very effective, that is pharmacogenomics. Today's semi-final match. I know today's semi-final match, but I had a class scheduled, so unfortunate for me. Vaccines contain virus in it. Some of them do. We'll discuss that later. Can genes cause cancer? Genes will not cause cancer, but changes or modification in them can lead to certain complications that may lead to cancer. RNA function, as we discussed, it's about proteins to make the proteins in the body. Please don't take a class on Saturday. I don't think there is any class scheduled on Saturday anyway, so I'm not sure why you asked it. All right. So, okay, I also got the scores from some of you. Thank you. Anyway, so now moving forward, we have agricultural applications of biotechnology. Now, in case of agricultural applications of biotechnology, we are basically looking at how biotechnology can help us in agriculture, in solving some of the problems in agriculture. One of the examples is this picture that you see right here on your screen. Do you know what exactly it is? BT cotton, right? So this is a special variant of cotton called as BT cotton. BT comes from Bacillus thuringiensis. Basically, this is the bacteria, uh, the name of the bacteria that we actually take the genes from. So, interestingly, what we have done in BT cotton is that we have taken some genes from bacteria, and these genes have been added to cotton. This gene, there is a gene that we have taken from bacteria, and this gene has been added to cotton. Why? Because adding this gene to cotton makes it uh, uh, resist something called as bollworm. There is a pest called as bollworm, and this pest bollworm used to be a big challenge. This bollworm used to be a big challenge for cotton industry or cotton production, because it would eat away a lot of cotton crops, destroy a lot of cotton crops, and the productivity of cotton would go down by up to 20 to 25%. So that's why for cotton, this bollworm has been a big challenge. To solve this problem, a gene which we identified in a bacteria, we took that gene from that bacteria. Now this gene was inserted inside cotton, and when cotton has these genes, when the cotton has this gene, then in that case the cotton is able to make its own pesticide. It is able to Cotton is able to make its own pesticide. In a manner, you can say that uh, cotton becomes resistant to bollworm. So in a manner, it becomes bollworm resistant. So now that it became bollworm resistant, it also meant that the productivity of cotton could increase. That 20 to 25 decrease that we were looking at, now that problem could be solved with the help of BT cotton, with the help of this genetic difference. So that is where we see that it became very, very crucial that we could use the properties of this gene inside a certain bacteria, and this could help in cotton making its own pesticide against a pest that was destroying the crop, right? So that's why it was very, very important development in the field of BT cotton. Now, in case of agricultural applications, when we are talking about these kind of examples like BT cotton, these are called as transgenic plants. These are called as transgenic plants or transgenic crops. Now these transgenic plants or transgenic crops, the word is transgenic, right? These are called as transgenic. So transgenic because it is coming from transgene. The word is coming from transgene. So now when I say transgenic, the word trans often is used when something is changing from one place to another. Let's say if somebody is being transferred, so they are being transferred means that they are moving from one place to another. So when we have transgenic plants, it means that there is a gene that has come from somewhere else, correct? So there is one or more genes which are artificially inserted inside the plant, and in this scenario we say that there is a transgene, there is a transgene that has come from somewhere else. So transgene basically means what? That you have a gene taken from some other organism. Some other organism. It could be another plant, it could be another animal, it could be another microorganism, it could be another human, if at all that was possible. It could be an alien if that was a possibility. So it could be taken from anywhere. Whenever the gene is coming from somewhere else, it's not coming from the same plant, it is coming from somewhere else, then in that case we'll say that it is a transgene, and these kind of plants will be called as transgenic plants. These kind of crops will be called as transgenic crops. So that is basically what's happening here. Just remember, it can come from any organism if it was a possibility. So you just have to find which organism can you take it from. So for example, let's say tomorrow, if we wanted the plants to move, if we wanted the plants to move, then in that case we'll have to find the genes which are responsible for movement inside the human body. We'll find those genes, we'll take those genes, insert it inside the plant, and the plants will also start to move, if at all that was possible. If at all that was possible, this is basically something that we can do. So then in that case, that kind of a plant that is able to roam around from one place to another would be called as a transgenic plant. But it's not that simple that you can take any gene from anywhere and insert it inside any plant that you want. It's not that easy. So but otherwise, theoretically it's possible. Theoretically you can do all that. You want the plants to speak, you find the genes which are responsible for voice, you take that gene, insert it inside the plant, and plants will start to speak and say, I am Groot. So all these things are actually possible. uh, Theoretically possible. Theoretically all these things are possible. Practically we haven't seen these things being possible at all until now. So walking and talking plants can only happen in movies like the Marvel movies or the Lord of the Rings movies and all that. So but theoretically all these will be called as transgenes. All right. Now in case of plants, when we are talking about plants, we basically see that all these things are there. And in case of cotton, we have seen that this is the specific gene, CRY1AC. This is the name of the gene that has been taken from a bacteria, and that's why it has been named as Bt cotton. Right, it has been named as Bt cotton, and it makes it pest resistant against bollworm. Similarly, there are a lot of desirable properties that we could add to these crops. So for example, we can increase the crop production. We discussed about how Bt cotton was able to increase the crop production by 20 to 25%. Similarly, we can also use it for increasing the nutritional value. All right, this could be used for increasing the nutritional value of the produce as well. Here one example that we have is called as golden rice. Now golden rice is a kind of rice where you have enhanced amount of vitamin A. You have enhanced amount of vitamin A. Now when we consume rice, right? When we consume rice, we don't consume rice for vitamins, correct? Rice is a source of what? Rice is a source of carbohydrate, right? Rice is source of carbohydrate. So, and carbohydrate provides us energy. So rice basically is consumed so that we can get carbohydrates. Rice is consumed so that we can get carbohydrates and get energy from there, but not for vitamin A. But there is possibility that we can add something called as beta carotene that is taken from daffodil plant and insert inside the rice, and then this beta carotene will be converted to vitamin A, and hence this variety of rice will also have vitamin A apart from carbohydrates. So it will have carbohydrates. Additionally, it will have vitamin A. Where would we use it? We would use it whenever we are supposed to give it to people who have deficiency of vitamin A, or areas or regions where we see deficiency of vitamin A. To that population, we can give golden rice, and with this golden rice, they'll be able to maintain the levels of vitamin A that is required for their proper functioning. So that is where we see that prevention of deficiency of vitamin A can be done with the help of golden rice. So if you see the pictures, you see that this basically is the golden rice. This is golden rice, and this is the normal rice, the white colored rice, right? This is the normal rice, and the yellow colored one, I obviously calling yellow rice would not sound well. Golden rice seems very nice, so that's why golden rice is what we are saying. So you can see the basic difference between the normal rice that we consume versus golden rice. So it has better nutritional value, right? It has better nutritional value. Now in case of other such applications, we see that also we can increase the shelf life. We can even increase the shelf life of the fruits, vegetables, plants, or even seeds. In all these cases also, we can make certain genetic changes so that they can last longer. So doing that is also possible, and we have been doing it. Similarly, there are environmental benefits also. There are environmental benefits also. So for example, let's say when we talk about bt cotton making its own pesticide, it simply also means that because it is making its own pesticide, it also means that you do not need to provide it pesticides externally, right? You do not need to administer the pesticides externally. Pesticides can be harmful, they can be poisonous, and that's why not only for our consumption they can be poisonous, but at the same time, because traces, what happens is that traces of pesticides come with the fruits and the vegetables that we consume. So we need to avoid that, we want to avoid that. At the same time, uh, these pesticides are not also very good for longevity of the soil. The soil also might lose its properties over time if at all this was I mean a lot of pesticide was being administered to it. So that's why lesser pesticide also has an environmental benefit from that perspective. Then overall, so that's why understand that how they will all be very very crucial from this perspective. Now comparing it to traditional plant breeding practices, now we understand that when we talk about the transgenic plants, it means that there is an artificial insertion, right? There is an artificial insertion of a gene that has been brought from somewhere, right? Artificially we have brought this from somewhere and we are using it inside it. But in traditional plant breeding practices, these are more hit and trial methods. That we tried crossbreeding of some plant with some other plant, it worked. So it worked, it gave us some good produce, so we kept on using it. Sometimes it did not, we did not use it further. So that's what happens generally with traditional plant breeding practices, that these are more pragmatic approaches, practical approaches, where we see some kind of benefit, and we keep using it whenever we see those benefits. But when it comes to making of the transgenic plants or the genetically modified plants, in those cases, whatever steps we are taking those steps for a reason. There is a scientific basis behind making the use of those certain genes or inserting certain genes, etc. So that's why understand that there's a big difference when it comes to the traditional plant breeding practices versus what we see with transgenic crops or transgenic plants. Now it comes down to how exactly do we develop it, how do we develop the transgenic plants, how do we develop the transgenic crops. So first and foremost, just understand this, that there is a certain technology which is called as the recombinant DNA technology. There's this technology called as the recombinant DNA technology, and this is the technology that we use for the development of the transgenic plants. So it's not that simple that you'll simply cut open the plant, you'll insert the gene, and the gene starts working. I hope the things were that simple. Unfortunately, the things are not that simple. There is this entire process that we have to use so that we can get the transgenic plants working. So this entire process, this is called as recombinant DNA technology. So let's try to understand what exactly is this technology and how does this technology work. So if you see this diagram, this is how a typical uh, recombinant DNA technology works. So first and foremost, we have to isolate the gene of interest. We have to isolate that gene, we have to take away the gene in its pure form, the gene that we want. So this is the bt gene, this is the golden rice gene. So that gene has been taken, the beta carotene gene, you can say. So that beta carotene gene has been taken away. So that's the gene of interest for us. This blue colored portion that you have right here, this is the gene of interest. All right, this is the gene of interest. Now, this gene is not directly inserted inside the plant. All right, this is not directly inserted inside the plant. Instead, what we do is we find a carrier or a vector. We find a vector or a carrier. Now, this vector or carrier or whatever we say, this basically would be either a virus or a bacteria. All right, it could be virus or bacteria. So we'll pick a virus or we'll pick a bacteria, and inside this bacteria or virus, this is where we'll insert this gene of interest. So we'll find, it's like a jigsaw puzzle that you have. How you, let's say if you have a missing piece, it's not that you can just insert anything anywhere. You'll have to find those sequences, and only in their certain places only you can actually use those parts of the jigsaw puzzle, correct? So something similar will happen here also. You'll have to find an area where we can make the cut, open, and this is where we can insert this gene of interest. So just understand what's happening. So let's say that this is the gene of interest that we are talking about, right? And in this is the portion where we are making the cut, right? This is the portion where we are making the cut, like this. So we cut it open, and this is the area which we have cut it open, right, in this particular gene. And now this blue colored area, this blue colored gene will be inserted here. This blue colored gene will be inserted here. So this basically comes here. This blue colored portion, it comes here. So in this manner, basically what we are doing is that we found where the cut can be made, so that exactly we can fit this gene of interest. And then we have cut it open, the carrier, basically the carrier or the vector as we call it, it has been cut it, we have cut it open, and then we have inserted the gene of interest here. And then we'll also have to make the ends to stick together. So we'll take a fevicol or a fevistick, etc., and we'll make the stick ends to stick together. But that fevicol here is not the fevicol that obviously that we use in our homes, but there is a certain enzyme that we use. There's a certain enzyme called uh, which is basically used here, called as DNA ligase. So that enzyme will be used, and with the help of that enzyme we'll make the ends to stick together. And once we have done that, this is where we'll produce multiple copies, thousands to lakhs of copies of this particular gene. And then ultimately it will be inserted inside the plant. So that's why the entire method is not that direct. It's not that you pick the gene and insert it inside the plant and it magically starts working. Unfortunately, things are not that simple. There is this entire process that we have to follow. So first we'll pick the gene, we'll pick the gene of interest, then we'll pick a suitable vector for it, a suitable carrier for it, and we will insert it inside this carrier, right? We will insert it inside this carrier. Once we have done that, once we have inserted it inside the carrier, this is where what we'll do next is that we will produce multiple copies of it. And once we have these multiple copies, we'll finally insert it inside the plant. So again, just going through the steps, the first step is to isolate the desired DNA in its pure form, right? Away from any kind of macromolecules or any kind of impurities. We'll first isolate the desired DNA. Then after that, we will make the use of something called as restriction enzymes. We'll make the use of something called as restriction enzymes, and these restriction enzymes will play a major role in determining where this location is. Restriction enzymes will mark the location. It will mark the location where we have to make the cut in the vector. So restriction enzymes will be used there for identification of that area. So that will be done. So this process is called as restriction enzyme digestion. Then after that, we are making the use of the enzyme called as DNA ligase. And as I told you, that DNA ligase will be required for making the ends to stick together. It's the fevicol, you can say. It's the fevicol of this particular entire process. So DNA ligase will be used. And then after that, you are making the use of polymerase chain reaction or PCR, so that you can create multiple copies. It's just like photocopying. So multiple copies of this will be created with the help of the PCR. And then lastly, it will be inserted inside the host. It will be introduced into the recipient host. This process also has a name called as transformation. So first, again, just repeating it again. First, we pick the gene that we need in its pure form. We got the gene. This gene then will be inserted inside the vector. For that, we need restriction enzymes. Restriction enzymes will locate the areas where we can make the cut. The cut is made, the DNA is inserted, and then after that, DNA ligase is used to make the ends to stick together. Once that has been done, multiple copies of it is being produced, and all these multiple copies will be then inserted inside the plant. So in this manner, this entire method will be used so that recombinant DNA technology could work. Now, even then, there's no guarantee of how much it will work or not. Theoretically, many a times it may seem possible that a certain combination might work, but we see that it's not all the time that combination works. Many times the combination does fail also, and that's why we have to do all the research and study before we can actually make this work. So that is basically what we do in this entire process. Read this question. This was asked in your paper. I'm launching the poll for you. Yeah, many of you are giving the correct answer. What type of vector? Vector could be, as I told you, it could be a virus or a bacteria. We look for a certain virus or a certain bacteria which would be able to, or rather, which will be compatible with a certain gene. So something that will be compatible with a certain gene is what we look for, and once we get it, we use it. Okay, so 55% of you have given the correct answer, but again, more numbers were required. Recombinant DNA technology or genetic engineering allows the genes to be transferred across different species of plants. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. From animals to plants, can we do that? Yes, we can do that. From microorganisms to higher organisms, can we do it? Yes, we can do it. What did I tell you? From any other organism. Any other organism. Why is the confusion? I don't know. Any organism. We can take any organism and we can transfer it from there. I'm not saying whether it will work or not. I'm saying any organism. Pick any organism. If you are taking the gene from there, if you are inserting it inside the plant, done. So whether it is about different species of plants or from animals to plants or microorganisms to higher organisms, we can do all that. That is what essentially we are doing. We are just picking our gene of interest. Where's the question of whether it is coming from a plant or an animal or an or a microorganism or maybe from an alien? Nobody cares. As long as it is a gene that is coming from some other organism, you can take it. That is what we have discussed. I wrote it here also. Gene taken from some other organism, right? So there is no question of whether it is only plant or animal or only microorganism. So please don't confuse in these things, please. All right. So that's why all these things actually can be done, right? All these things can be done. Now, overall, so this is about using it in terms of producing the transgenic plants. Now, there are other applications in agriculture. For example, biofuels can also be counted as an agricultural application, right? Biofuels, we discussed that most of the biofuels being used today, they are crop based. They are based on food crops. So because they are food crop based, obviously they are also agricultural application of biotechnology, right? So that's why biofuels also can be counted here. Similarly, we use it for biofortification, right? We use it for biofortification. Now, what is fortification? Just try to understand this. If you see here, It is the addition of an ingredient to food to increase the concentration of a particular element. So whether it is vitamins or salt or anything. So for example, we have iodized salt, correct? So iodized salt is an example of fortification. But when we are doing it naturally, when we are trying to do it through a fruit, a vegetable, or a crop, or any kind of food, for example, golden rice. So golden rice is an example of biofortification. So that's why biofortification is whenever we are doing that with the help of any plant. All right. When we are doing it with the help of a crop or a plant, then we'll say that it is biofortification. So biofortification is also a method that is very popular in biotechnology, in agriculture. So for example, when we talk about golden rice, that's an example, and there have been a list of different uh, biofortified food that we actually have used over the years, and in many different crops we see that it is something that we have made the use of. So that's why there are a lot of biofortified foods. Similarly, there is also something uh, which is basically which is called as supplementation. All right, sometimes we also make the use of something called as supplementation. So supplementation basically is when we are taking something additionally. When we are taking something additionally, it is called as supplementation. So in case of supplementation, what we see is that we actually are not doing it just through crops or just adding certain vitamins or minerals, let's say, in the crop, but instead of doing that, we are taking supplements. For example, let's say vitamin D supplements, bicosouls or vitamin B complex. So all these are supplements, so that is called as supplementation. And fortification is when we are adding it to the food instead of taking it as a medicine. So when you take it as a medicine, I'm just simplifying it. When you take it as a medicine, it is called as supplementation. When you take it as a part of your food, it is called as fortification. Then there is something that has been an issue, which is called as hidden hunger. Something that WHO has been flagging from time to time is hidden hunger. Now, what is hidden hunger? The meaning of hidden hunger is that when, let's say, many of the poor countries, for example, which are not able to produce their own food, but they rather are dependent on other countries, maybe European countries, US, India, Russia, China, Japan, etc. These are the countries which are supplying the food to them. Now in these kind of cases, what happens is, our focus always is on grains, providing carbohydrates first, providing the energy to survive first. So rice will be provided in large quantities. So what we see is that we are providing the food that is required, but they're not getting all the required nutrients. They're not getting every nutrient that they need for what you would call as a balanced diet, so that a good growth and development of the body could happen. So this kind of a scenario is called as hidden hunger, that although they are eating, although they are consuming enough for their survival, they're not getting every nutrient that they need. So that is called as hidden hunger. So hidden hunger is when enough food is provided, but not all the nutrients. So that is called as hidden hunger. That is something that is basically what has been flagged as hidden hunger. And it's not uh, largely about your bad food habits. That if, let's say, you are not eating, you have the resources to eat enough of fruits and vegetables to get all the vitamins and minerals, but you are choosing burgers, fries, and pizza. So that's your call. So that will not be counted here. But when it leads to, let's say, something like malnutrition, when it leads to some kind of deficiency diseases in somebody, then in that case it will be counted as hidden hunger, when they do not even have the access to that food. That is what counts more like hidden hunger. All right. So there are number of different biofortified food that has been used. Largely we see that it's about vitamin A, then various minerals like zinc or iron. We see that largely we make the use of all these biofortified food for providing all these vitamins and minerals. So that is basically what we are doing with regards to all these biofortified food. So for example, we have wheat. So in case of wheat, what we see is that we try to enhance the zinc content in it. Then in case of maize, we see that we are trying to enhance the vitamin A quantity. In case of sweet potato, we see that we are trying to increase the amount of beta carotene, and that will help in increasing vitamin A. Similarly, in beans, we try to enhance the iron and zinc content. In case of millet, we see that we try to enhance the iron content. So that's why in all these kind of uh, produce that we have, if you see here, we have been trying that in all these different, uh, we can enhance the uh, vitamins and minerals in them by doing some kind of genetic modification. Then, genetically modified crops can also be used as animal feed, that we want to provide good nutrition to animals as well. We want that they should also be able to get the access to the required nutrition, and that is where also we see that we can make the use of it, so that you don't have to feed them a lot, but rather you are not feeding the quantity, but rather you are feeding the quality, so that they can be useful for us. Similarly, we have genetically engineered herbicide tolerant or HT variant crops. So HT variant crops is where they are tolerant towards a certain herbicides. So herbicides will be used for what? Herbicides will be used to kill the weeds, kill the unwanted plant growth that is happening in in an agricultural field. So to kill them, we'll be using herbicides. So there are crops which are made to be herbicide tolerant, because if they are herbicide tolerant, even if you're using pesticides, even if you're using these herbicides, the unwanted plants, the weeds, etc., they will die, but the herbicides will have no effect on the crop growth. So that's why you'll be able to enhance the growth of the crops. So that's why we see that there have been a lot of herbicide variant or herbicide tolerant variants also that we have been able to produce. Similarly, the use of biofertilizers. We discussed that when you make biogas out of the crop residue, you get biofertilizers that can be used. So that also counts as an agricultural application of biotechnology. Similarly, in case of floriculture, also we can make the use of it. So floriculture meaning flower cultivation. The flower cultivation industry can also make the use of biotechnology, or especially with regards to the use of biotechnology. So there also we see that it becomes very very crucial and very uh, important from agricultural produce or agricultural income point of view. Because what do you need in flowers? You probably will want that the flowers are bigger, you might want that the contrast in colors are good, or they are lasting longer. So you'll need all these properties in a flower, and that's again where the flower industry has been working. So that's not only in the food crops, but also we see that in the commercial crops also we have been trying that. For example, even in India's case, we have been trying something with GM rubber, right? We are trying something with GM rubber. So we want that GM rubber should be able to grow in northeastern states like Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. So in these kind of areas also we want them to grow. Largely we know that rubber grows in South India. It grows in states of Karnataka, in Kerala, in parts of Tamil Nadu, etc. These are the areas where significantly they are growing. But we also want it to grow in the northeastern states like Assam and Arunachal Pradesh, where the climatic conditions are very different. So GM rubber, we have modified it accordingly so that they can grow in those areas also. So genetic modification to grow them in different climatic condition. All right, so that's something that we have done in India. So overall, this is where we see that there are all these different applications. Read this question. This was asked in your 2011 paper. Hmm. So some of you are saying C, some of you are saying D. Gurrit, you have also said C or D. That's good. So I'm not going to launch the poll for this question for a reason, and I'll tell you the reason while I explain you the question. So the question says, other than resistance to pests, what are the prospects for which genetically engineered plants have been created? First, to enable them to withstand drought. Yes, we have done it. We discussed also that one of the ways in which we can help them in growing in less amount of water. To increase the nutritive value of produce. Yes, we discussed golden rice and other biofortified crops. We have done it. To enable them to grow and do photosynthesis in spaceships and space stations. Now, is this possible? Today, yes, it is possible. It has been done by NASA in the International Space Station. Also, we have done it. So, today we have been able to do it. The question was asked in 2011. Until 2011, we had not done it. And the question says, mind the language, have been created. So you can only mark correct if something has been done already. It's not a can be question. It does not say for which of, I mean, prospects for which genetically engineered plants can be created. If it said can be created, close your eyes and mark ABCD. But it says have been created. So unless you know that something like this has happened, you cannot mark it. So that's why in 2011 it was wrong. In 2023 it is correct. To increase shelf life, yes. So 1, 2 and 4, if you go back in time and mark this answer in 2011, and 1, 2, 3 and 4 if you are marking this answer in 2023. So that's why. So just this is how science changes. We'll take another question in uh, another chapter where we'll see that here to it happened in almost 10 years. There is another question that has come where it happened just in 2 3 years, that the answer that UPSC had given officially was correct back then, just 3 to 4 years back. Today it's wrong. So science changes that quickly sometimes. So that's why this question actually becomes a very interesting question, because it was actually asked in the paper. Right. Next, we have white biotechnology. Now, white biotechnology is basically related to industrial applications, right? It is related to industrial applications. So, in industries also, there are multiple ways in which we are making the use of biotechnology. For example, the process of preservation. There we are using biotechnology. The fermentation process, which is also used in biofuel production, that there also we are using white biotechnology. So there are various ways in which white biotechnology is being used. For example, there is something called as biosorption. So biosorption basically is, you can say, coming from biological absorption. Bio plus absorption becomes biosorption. So this is basically where certain types of inactive, dead or microbial biomass can be used to concentrate and bind heavy metals from even very dilute aqueous solution. What do we mean? So basically what we mean is that these microorganisms, right? These microorganisms or the microbial biomass basically means microorganisms. So these microorganisms will be able to basically take away heavy metals from certain areas. So for example, let's say in the industrial units, when the soil would have become contaminated, so there will unleash these microorganisms and they'll just eat away all the heavy metals, which could be otherwise poisonous or harmful for the soil and the health of the entire ecosystem of that area. So their microorganisms can be used, and that's why in the industrial process it is used as a process for a lot of ways. So that's why it is called as uh, biosorption. Then similarly, we have something called as biomining. So biomining is when you are trying to extract something helpful, something which has a positive application. So that is called as biomining. So for example, for biomining, either microorganisms could be used or even plants could be used. Microorganisms could be used or even plants could be used for biomining. So with the help of biomining, what are we doing? With the help of biomining, we are trying to extract some desired metals or even fuel, even petroleum. So there also biomining could be used. So that's why extraction of desired minerals or even petroleum, it is called as biomining. So that's why either microorganisms could be used, and they would simply go in that area, they'll just eat upon whatever is there, and from them then you will extract these metals or these minerals, you'll extract it from these microorganisms. Similarly, even plants can be used, basically the roots of the plants can be used, and this is called as phytomining. So phyto, just know that whenever you have this term phyto, wherever you have this term phyto means plants, right? Phyto means plants. So wherever plants are being used, phyto will be the term. So phyto mining, that's why mining with the help of plants will be called as phyto mining. So in this particular scenario, we see that it can plants can also be used, the roots of the plants can be used. The roots of the plants will basically absorb the metals, minerals, etc., that are there in the soil, and then we take away the root, we burn the root, and from the ashes of the root we extract the metal. So for example, copper extraction many a times is done like that. That copper extraction will be done with the help of roots of the plants, because those areas are very dilute areas, so you do not really have a very high concentration of copper that you can use an industrial method, because industrial method will be way too costly, and you would have spent more money on extraction of copper uh, than the amount of money that you get from that copper. So then in that case, that makes no sense, it makes no financial sense, you can say. And that is where we see that phyto mining kind of process becomes very crucial. So there also we see that it is something that can be used. Lastly, we have something called as blue biotechnology. So blue biotechnology obviously is where we are using water or any application based on water. So for example, let's say when we are trying to clean water, where we have something like an oil zapper. So oil zapper is nothing but, you can say, a formulation of bacteria, of a formulation of bacteria where you have five different types of bacteria mixed together, which are mixed together, and they will be used wherever oil spills happen. They'll simply be taken to wherever oil spill has happened, and this oil zapper will start eating up on the hydrocarbon, and they'll disintegrate the hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon into carbon dioxide and moisture. They'll just disintegrate it in a manner that will take care of the oil spill on the sea or the ocean surface. So that is oil zapper, and that's why it will be called as blue biotechnology, because you are making the use of something on water, biotechnology on water. Similarly, when we talked about the algae based biofuel, so even algae based biofuel can be called as blue biotechnology, because there also it's a water related application. So in all these cases, when we are using anything with regards to water, we'll say that it is blue biotechnology, right? So let's stop our class here. The next application is environment based application, but we'll discuss about that in the next class. So if you have any doubt, please let me know. Nowadays, apples are growing everywhere. Are they transgenic? Not exactly transgenic every time. Many of them are hybrid varieties where you have done some kind of, uh, you have not done any genetic modification in them, but maybe a hybrid variety is being used uh, in many cases so that you can grow them everywhere. Please repeat biosorption. So biosorption is biological absorption, meaning that you have a biological mass, that is a microorganism, that will be taken to certain contaminated area, and they will just extract, they will just eat all the metals that are there in that area. So in many of the industrial units, these are used so that those industrial areas or the nearby areas could be cleaned with the help of these microorganisms. Bioremediation can be also added to the list. Yes, we can, and we'll discuss about that in detail anyway in tomorrow's class. Photo means light. Yes, that's true. Phytomining, this can lead to environment pollution as well as you're burning. No, 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 no. It's not about burning the plants. It's very specific. We only grow those plants there only because we need them. So it's not that something that was pre-existing is burnt away. Treatment of polluted water using seaweeds. Yes, that also is a specific example of blue biotechnology. That's correct. As cotton seeds are used for production of cow fodder, won't BT cotton be harmful for cattle? No, we haven't seen anything like that. That it would be harmful for cotton. Uh, that specific modification is harmful for the smaller pests and germs. So it has. We haven't really seen any problem with them. Leaderboard. Let me show you the leaderboard. Yeah, so this is the leaderboard for today. So a lot of you have given all, I mean, all meaning only two today. So you have given correct answers. That's great. Can the expiry date of mock test be extended? I'm not sure. You'll have to ask the support team. Can't get, please repeat on white slide that diagrams. The diagrams that are there on the slide are better than whatever I would draw. So it's better that you refer to it, and wherever required, I'm taking the white slides to explain something. Special thanks for that hilarious meme about DNA and RNA. Made my day. Yeah, even when I came across it, first I laughed for 2 minutes and then I thought, oh, I can use it in the class also. Is oil zapper a kind of biosorption? You can say that, yes. Is there any issue related to health conditions of consumers and soil fertilization with GM crops? We'll discuss these problems. Towards the end of this chapter, we'll discuss these problems tomorrow. Those who have no questions can leave. Yes, absolutely. Why not? Are steroids example of GM? Not always. The third option in the recombinant DNA technology question, is it the insertion the insertion can be done only to plants or other organisms as well. So when you say genetically modified organisms, then in that case it's any organism. But when you say transgenic plant, then it is only plant. What's the difference between transgenic and hybrid? So transgenic is when you are specifically taking a gene and then you are inserting this gene inside the plant. Hybrid could many a times be also natural, that you just took two plant varieties and you just made the cross pollination happen between them, and hence you have the hybrid variety. So it does not have an outside gene. Sometimes it could just be a genetic modification inside the crop itself. So there is no alien gene in it, there is no gene coming from outside. So then in the hybrid can have everything, but transgenic it specifically when you have a gene that is coming from outside. So that's the basic difference. How nuclear waste can be treated? Basically nuclear waste, we dispose, we try to keep it in nuclear facilities or waste disposal facilities instead of directly treating them, because they are radioactive, so treating them is almost impossible for us directly. Biomining example, uh, there are a lot of bacteria especially which can be used to extract metals which eat up the metals. Is it possible to insert human genes in the plant? Theoretically yes, practically not yet. Didn't teach the fundamentals of cells, like what are plastids. I mean, we don't need to go there, because biology is something that every 5 6 years sometimes they have asked a question, and that's there in the ncrts that I had asked everyone to refer. It's very simple and there is nothing extravagant that you'll not understand. I would suggest that please go through it, and if you have any doubts you can always bring it to me. Right, so I think I've almost taken all the questions. Is it vector that is directly inserted, or is the gene that is inserted? It's a vector. The vector will be inserted. Please explain the gene cutting and pasting process again. So what I'm saying is that first and foremost, you will take a vector. Inside the vector, you'll find an area where you can make the cut so that this required gene can be inserted. So you'll make the cut, insert the gene, stick the ends together, make multiple copies of it, and then introduce it to the plant. Can the use of turtles to clean up River Ganga considered as biotechnology or not? No, it's actually purely biology. It's not biotechnology because we are not applying something from our end. So that's why we'll not consider it. Generally, when we say biotechnology, uh, we are talking about something that we are doing artificially. When technology is being used artificially. Can't understand supplementation. Simple. Supplementation is when you are supplementing the requirement of any vitamin or mineral. So when you take medicines, vitamin D medicines, vitamin B12 medicines, that's supplementation. Many topics I think were missed, like GM mustard and transcription and translation. The chapter is not over. We'll come to GM mustard tomorrow. We are not even, I think, halfway through the chapter. Half of the chapter is left, so just wait. There are things that are still to be taught in this chapter. Everything that is required to be taught will be taught. Otherwise, there is no end to biotechnology. This is a 4 year engineering course for many, right? So just be patient. All right. So let's end the class here. Please go back, revise everything. If you have any doubts, please bring them back. We'll have a discussion on them. Thank you very much. We'll meet back tomorrow and we'll start with bioremediation. Thank you.